meet Oz Vessalius, a spoiled brat from the 19th century version of Beverly Hills, who found himself in a series of events that turned him into a slave of an ill-tempered girl. As they spent more time with one another, the two found their fates to be deeply connected in more ways than one. But how did that happen? Our story begins in your average British-style mansion, where servants were looking for their young Lord Oz Vessalius everywhere, where they went as far as to ask his personal attendant Gilbert to snitch him, to the point she traumatized him with a cat, to which Gilbert told them that he went to the lake. As they left, Gilbert began to beg his master to leave the closet, which he did. Although he was aware that Gilbert would get a good beat down for lying, Oz was grateful for his attendant. Outside the mansion, Gilbert was impressed by how well the maidens worked to restore the mansions, just for the sake of their young Lord Oz, who still didn't get why they would go through all of this trouble. Even the church where the event he's supposed to attend later has been well prepared, which made Oz feel frightened, especially by the silent clock on top of the long stairs. Just as Oz began to wonder about its purpose, a mysterious voice began to talk about its background. As for who's talking to them, it was Oz's uncle Oscar, who finally caught Oz, Gilbert, and Ada. Although Oscar thought that it's fun to tease Ms. Kate the scary maid from earlier, he reminded Oz that he must heed the advice and prepare for his 15th birthday, where he'll be declared as the official heir of the Vessalius dukedom, one of the 4 great dukedoms. To further get Oz's interest, Oscar began to talk about how old this mansion is since they moved in a few days ago. Oscar concluded the conversation by expressing how sad he is for holding the ceremony instead of Oz's father, who has left Oz's life for a while, probably in his holy mission to search for the milk. Fortunately for Oscar, Oz held him in high regard that he considered him like a father figure in his life. Before he parted ways with Oz, Oscar handed something that Oz requested, as well as buying the kids some time to get away from Ms. Kate. Although Gilbert protested against it, Oz knew how to deal with him. Oh, Oscar also threatened the kid that he'll summon a messenger from the abyss if he dares to mess up the ceremony. Although Oz didn't take such a threat seriously, it'll prove to be a fatal mistake later. For now, however, Oz had the time to enjoy himself with Ada and Gilbert, who headed to a secret place where they could see the capital of Reveille from a high place. When asked about the abyss, Oz said that it's a horrible prison that no one will leave. This scared Ada, but Gilbert assured her that only those that commits heinous crimes gets there, where they'll be visited by a messenger from the abyss to be taken to an even more scary place. As they kept on following Oz and discovering some beautiful scenery, Oz decided to hand the suit he got earlier to Gilbert, since the ceremony will also involve him for becoming of age too. Gilbert panicked at the news, to which Oz admitted that he didn't tell him just so he could see the look on his face. Still, Gilbert protested against wearing such stylish clothes, especially that he's a mere servant, to which Oz made it clear that he wants Gilbert to come as his friend. And not even the thought of his father's fury could persuade him from changing his mind. Silence took over the place after that, but it wasn't meant to last for long, as Oz began hearing strange noises, which he followed, until the ground broke under his feet, with Gilbert falling in the hole too after trying to save his master. Now I know what you're thinking. Oz and Gilbert were surprised to find themselves in Diddy's basement, right? The two were surprised to see a massive gravestone under a huge tree underground. As they explored it, Oz found a pocket watch hanging on the side of the massive cross. Unaware of what he was even doing, Oz picked the watch and began to check it out. As he began to hear that melody again, he found himself all alone, in a room full of terrifying dolls, just like your average Markiplier experience in playing Five Nights at Freddy's. Just as Oz was freaked out by this freak show, the dolls stopped when their lady Alice came in. Alice was happy that Oz had finally returned, adding that Oz used to visit her all the time. Much to his confusion, if noticing that Alice is just a ghost wasn't confusing enough, that is. Her happiness and welcoming nature, however, changed quickly as she surrounded the already terrified Oz with fire, before coming from his back and expressing how much she wants to get rid of him, promising that she will find him no matter where he hides. As he was about to lose his life in this nightmare, Gilbert woke Oz up. Before long, the two realized how late it's getting, so they called it a day and headed back to Ms. Kate. On their way back, however, Gilbert insisted on asking about the watch that Oz has, but Oz dismissed all that with ease as he handed over his suit to Gilbert and told him to ask Kate for more details on what he should do. Again, Gilbert protested against the decision, but Oz convinced him to do so without saying much. Now that he got his verbal scolding from Kate, Oz got to have some time of his own, which he spent thinking about that dream he got earlier today, especially that he still feels pain on his neck from being choked. Meanwhile, Gilbert kept on panicking at what he should be doing with the clothes, when a cloaked woman appeared behind him. The night came, and so did the guests. For Oz, he couldn't stop himself from thinking about those what-ifs, as he was wondering about where Gilbert is in this deteriorating weather. It turned out that Gilbert had been brainwashed into doing something bad at the ceremony, a fact unknown to Oz for now. For now, everyone seemed to be enjoying their time at this party, where Oz was glad to see his uncle there, who introduced him to an elegant young lady, Sharon Rainsworth, that came in with an entire garden as a congratulations gift for Oz on behalf of her sick mother. Understandably, Oz was mesmerized by Sharon's beauty, but due to the nature of this ceremony, he had to remain as elegant as Sharon was towards him. If that wasn't enough, hearing that she's 14 years old made Oz deep down fall head over heels for Sharon. Unable to resist his feelings, Oz took a flower, a cup of juice, and what little courage he had and began to riz Sharon. Despite how cringe it was for Oscar, Ada, and Sharon herself, the latter managed to excuse herself eloquently, but not before warning Oz from people that will try to exploit his newfound position in society, while encouraging him to stay by those who support him the most, and with that, she left with her servant Break. As she left, Oz began to wonder about where Gilbert went up to, which Oscar assumed that he might be making his own preparation for the ceremony, since he'll also be taking part in it. For Sharon, she discussed with Break about the possibility of having the Vessalius family as their ally, with Oz now becoming a duke, which after being teased for a bit by him about Oz being fit as a perfect match for her, Break agreed that an alliance could now be possible. What they didn't know, however, was that something ominous awaits the Vessalius family. By the time the skies began to rain, the rest of the guests had moved to the cathedral, where they were met with Oscar, who made the opening speech of the ceremony. Oz was nervous to enter initially, despite Ada's words of encouragement, and yet Oz was left with no choice but to enter when he was called. Oz entered to the cheers and claps of the guests. He was nervous this entire time, or at least until he saw Gilbert standing next to the silent clock. From afar, cloaked figures were smirking like your creepy uncle from afar at the fact that their stag has been set. Oscar performed his part of the ceremony with ease, and now all that's left is for Oz to repeat his oath 3 times at the silent clock. What could possibly go wrong with that?
And nothing can go wrong!
Just as Oz finished up saying the oath for the first time, the clock moved to midnight. For the cloaked people, this was ideal. Oz is indeed the one from their prophecy, and now it's finally time to move. Amidst his confusion, Oz noticed how time froze, with everyone looking at him in horror. Before he could do anything, the cloaked figures broke into the cathedral, while Gilbert betrayed his friend and stabbed him, leading for a magical circle to glow below them. Everything seemed fine so far for the cult, until one of their members, Zway, noticed that they're beginning to lose control of Gilbert. Before the latter could harm Oz any further, he was saved by a monstrous rabbit holding a scythe. Gilbert also was saved, as the spirit that possessed him got exorcised instantly. The most surprising thing for Oz, however, was that this rabbit was none other than Alice. Seeing that the cloaked trio were expressing hostility towards Oz and herself, Alice declared that anyone that comes at Oz with any harm must suffer the consequences. Why, you might ask? Because Oz is now Alice's property. Still, that didn't change the Reaper's mind in carrying out their plan. Left with no other options, Alice lured the 2 men to fight her outside. Initially, Alice seemed to be on the back foot, but this would be further from the truth, as Alice was merely trying to see the full strength of the 2 Reapers. Seeing that they got no aces up their sleeves to play, Alive unleashed her full might at them, bringing them both to the cathedral. Although they were humiliatingly defeated, Alice decided to spare their lives. Not that she's merciful or anything, but because she figured that these Reapers were messengers from the Abyss. As she declared that, Gilbert tried to desperately get an answer for what Oz did to deserve being sent to the Abyss, but ended up discovering something even more concerning, which made him stand in the way of Oz, who tried to attack the Reapers, only to end up slashing his friend instead. Oz fell in a state of panic as he saw what he did to his best friend. With Alice leaving the picture, Oz was left to his fate, where he got dragged down the magical circle the Reapers made. The next morning, Break was enjoying his tea time like your average British country ball, while being aware, just like Sharon and the guy in black, of how daunting their task of saving Oz will be. For Oz, it didn't take him long to figure out that the Abyss and everything he experienced so far were all as real as the hunger he's feeling. As he kept on looking for food, Oz found himself stepping on a talking doll, which frightened Oz to death. Just as he went to check on the doll, he found it running around him, just like your average Naruto runner at Area 51.
Rachel, Nevada at 6:30. Reporting live, Joe Bartel's 13 Action News.
Before jumping out of a floating door and attacking Oz. Fortunately for Oz, he managed to free himself and throw the doll on the ground. Now Oz can finally catch a breath and recollect his thoughts. Once he deals with this doll once again, as it began to throw rocks at him from behind. Seeing that Oz took shelter behind an umbrella, the doll decided to step up its game and throw boulders at the boy, except that it literally collapsed on him. Once again, however, the doll jumped at Oz out of nowhere again, with something sharp in its hands, to which Oz resisted it by swinging his umbrella left and right. Before Oz could even get a moment to catch his breath, however, a colossal doll attacked him. Oz tried to run away from it, until he found himself at a dead end. Just as it was about to squeeze dear life out of Oz, Alice saved the young boy, as she claimed that Oz is her prey and hers alone. Remembering who she is, Oz called Alice out as a perverted dom. What? I'm not making that up. He really called her out as that, which got him punished by Alice. With Oz finally in the clear, Alice couldn't help but express her disappointment in how much of a beta Oz is. She then proceeded in explaining to him about how this world functions, and that the creatures that have been attacking him are called chains, where trumps are considered as the weakest chains in this world. As he concluded that Alice is a chain herself, he assumed that all chains have that thirst to attack humans, just as she tried to do so in his illusion. Alice, however, denied the allegation, as she assured him that she met him for the first time when she saved him from the Reapers. On top of that, Alice got offended that she's being compared to the Trumps, but before she could explain what she is exactly, Oz became delighted at the sight of a small box of cookies, since he was starving up until this very moment. Alice was understandably dismayed at Oz's absurdity, as he not only seemed to not fear her, but also seemed to be adapting to how this world functioned. Oz stopped when Alice finally had enough of his stupidity, and began to talk properly about how easy it is for him to get used to his surroundings as long as he remains calm. Oz also added that he doesn't see Alice as his enemy since she saved his life earlier. Not used to hearing such positive things, Alice brushed it off as Oz being thick-headed, before properly introducing herself to the confused boy and giving him special permission to call her by her actual name. Her good treatment for Oz wasn't out of kindness, but to make sure she uses him to serve her best interest. As for what her goal might be, Alice pointed out that she wants to leave the Abyss, just like Oz, which is why she was looking for a contractor as good as him. To make sure that they start on solid ground, Alice began to point out that the Abyss is a different dimension than the real world. She also pointed out that she can use her power on some junction points in this world to create an exit, while taking Oz with her, of course. Sounds like good news. There is one problem though: Alice's power has a limiter at the moment, which might prevent her from unleashing her full potential to do that. As such, the solution to that issue is the contract, which is signed by simply calling Alice by her name and agreeing to a contract between them both. Seeing that their goal is the same, Oz was about to sign up for the contract, when he suddenly got taken outside by a mysterious person, much to Alice's dismay. For Oz, he was surprised to see that the person that took him away from Alice was none other than Sharon, who informed him that Alice would have killed him if he went ahead with signing the contract. Hearing this, Oz became relieved as he held onto Sharon's hand and began to follow her like a good simp. He learned from Sharon that the Ransworth family had assembled a rescue team the moment he fell in the Abyss. The more he heard about her devotion to join the rescue efforts, the more he grew fond of her. Sharon also informed him that Black Rabbit, which is Alice's nickname, is the most notorious chain of all in the Abyss, and that she uses contracts to get her way to influence other dimensions that the Abyss, including the real world. As for what Oz saw during the ceremony, Sharon said that it's a mere reflection of Alice's powers in the real world, which is provisional. She also added that she has pretty much gotten rid of every single one of her contractors once they have served their purpose. Despite these accounts, Oz couldn't help but think of how she saved him twice already, which Sharon brushed it off as absurd. Heck, even Oz couldn't believe what he was saying. Just when Sharon began to express her knowledge of how Alice had turned on him and expressed her desire to eliminate him, Oz noticed that Sharon had mentioned Alice by her actual name, as well as knowing about Alice's attempt to murder him. As he finished questioning Sharon about those, he realized that he had fallen for the trap of another chain hook, line, and sinker. Just as it was about to finish off her prey, Alice arrived just in time to save Oz once again. After explaining to him that this chain exploits its victims' memories, Alice took Oz to take shelter behind what's left of a wall. Although the chain was still looking for them, Oz began to ask Alice about what she knew about him, to which she answered that she's oblivious to anything about Oz as he is about herself. The only thing that Oz learned was that Alice got attracted to him by the sound of the watch he found, as it was familiar to her. As such, Alice concluded that Oz is the only person that can lead her outside the Abyss. The moment she finished mustering these words, Alice got caught off guard by the spider chain. With her powers severely limited, and now that she's tied down and had already lost an arm, Alice urged Oz to leave her behind and run for his life.
Run, boy, run. This world is not meant for you.
However, Oz didn't abide by this, as he took a stick from the ground and charged at the chain. Although the odds seemed to be stacked against Oz, he managed to get his way inside of the chain's belly. With his determination to not lose Alice again driving him, Oz managed to get through the thick layers of spider threads to reach out to Alice, where he had declared that he'll be signing up the contract with her. Hearing this, Alice took down the monster with her magic from inside out, as she approached Oz with her missing hand restored and telling him that he should say, "Let me seal a contract with you, master." Now that she has taken over Oz's body completely, Alice has unleashed her full powers to finally break out of the Abyss to the real world, where she nearly hit Sharon, if it wasn't for Break's awareness. Although Gilbert was worried that some sort of harm had been inflicted upon Oz after breaking out of the Abyss, Break and Sharon were glad that he still made it out, even though Oz is now the fallen angel that might bring ruin upon them. When the young boy woke up from his coma, he was surprised to find a grown-up Gilbert sitting next to him. As the latter stood up, Oz was even more surprised to see that Sharon and Break were also in the same room as him. Seeing that he's confused, Break and Sharon assured him that he's no longer in the Abyss, thus he has nothing to worry about. They also promised him that Ada and his uncle Oscar are also doing fine. Before he could feel relieved, Oz remembered that he slashed his best friend Gilbert with his own hands, to which Break assured him that even Gilbert is doing alright too. For now, Break expressed how much he liked Oz's new outfit, but he also couldn't resist the urge to make an ironic thrust at Oz's incompetence. But But aside from that, Break proceeded in introducing himself as he is, while introducing Gilbert as Raven, to which for the foreseeable future. Oh, let's not forget about Lil Emily, who's been sitting on top of Break's shoulder. Now that introductions are out of the way, Break treated his guest to dinner as he assumed that he was hungry. Sharon thought that it's a great opportunity for her to flex the property of the Rainsworth, but Oz was still having much more important concerns than that, especially about the Abyss and why he was sent there in the first place. Break was willing to answer the boy, but after getting some answers to some questions of his own first, Oz proceeded to talk about everything he has experienced up until now, from his encounter with the chains and his contract with Alice, to how Alice is attracted to the melody of his pocket watch. Instead of getting answers to his own questions, Break informed Oz that he'll be put under arrest for the time being. Why is that? It turned out that the Rainsworth are working for an organization called Pandora, which is a peacekeeping organization on the surface, while it's involved in performing researches on the Abyss and its incidents in the background. And since Oz had already taken paths that leads in and out of the Abyss, and after becoming an illegal contractor, there's only one thing that Pandora needs to do.
We're going to build a wall.
Jokes aside, Break made it clear that it's forbidden for normal people to open a path to the Abyss or make a contract with chains. If that wasn't horrific enough for Oz, Break revealed that Rave, Sharon, and himself were all members of Pandora, before proceeding to take Oz to prison. Sharon, however, tried to stand for the young teen, except that something strange began to happen to him, which led him to hold onto a knife from the table, as Break took Oz down to the carriage outside with his hands tied. Oz used the knife to free himself and hold Sharon as a hostage. Break was quick to realize that this was all Alice's doing. As such, he decided to reveal that he did all that to lure her out. Break tried to get Alice to cooperate, but the latter refused. Left with no other options, Break freed Sharon by force. Before proceeding to lock her in a magical circle and exorcise her out of Oz. Despite his success, Break found it odd that Alice wasn't the giant black rabbit he did read about in reports, but it didn't take him long to figure out that it was all because her powers were sealed. Perhaps more shockingly for her and Oz, however, was the fact that Alice's powers will consume them both until they're both goners, which is why Break confessed that he resorted to Raven to seal Alice's powers. Frustrated by Break's cockiness, Alice confessed that she came to the real world in hope of finding the lost fragments of her memories. Since she moved to the Abyss, Alice has lost her memories of pretty much everything except her name, but she was still aware that her memories have been fragmented and lost everywhere in the real world, which is why she escaped the Abyss. Break, however, wasn't buying this as he began to beat her senseless. Seeing this, Oz had enough and decided to step in to take the hit instead of Alice, while threatening to not cooperate with the Rainsworths. To Break's surprise, Oz figured out that Sharon and the others needed him for a specific task, to which Break, despite being amused by how smart Oz was, shifted the blame on Emily for teasing the young boy. Aside from that, Break apologized for going a little too far with the two, as he set them free from the magical circle they were in. Before Oz and Alice could follow Break, Oz's pocket watch began to glow on its own, indicating that a connection between the real world and the Abyss has been established. As the path was connecting, a chain came out of it, or rather escaped the Abyss, just like KSI's latest song. Break tried to convince Sonic the Hedgehog that he won't find any contractor in this world, but Sonic got so upset that he began to cause mayhem in the mansion. Noticing that the chain is now trying to break through and head to town, Break asked Raven to remove the limiter from Alice to deal with the monster, and definitely not to test her powers.
No. Anyway, last week...
Despite how annoyed Alice was, she took down Sonic with relative ease. Once Alice turned back to her original form, she rushed to the already fallen pocket watch, only to find herself touching hands with Oz. Suddenly, Oz began to see some of Alice's missing memories, as well as that same dream he had when he first picked the pocket watch, before finding himself in a white hall, where an old blonde guy is watching him from behind a curtain. The shadowy figure, whose name is Recap Vessalius, couldn't help but express his happiness for Oz's arrival, as well as Alice's arrival in the real world too. Jack also concluded his meeting by encouraging Oz to help Alice find her memories as soon as possible, just so he can find the answers that he is seeking. Before taking his leave, when he woke up, Oz found that Alice was crying from joy after she got a clue on how to get her memories back. Although this was impressive to Break and Sharon, it didn't take long for her to get back to her authoritarian self, leaving Oz confused. For her part, Alice was also concerned. In her current state, she's way too weak that everyone here can eliminate her at will, and if she decided to unleash her full power, she will be putting Oz's life at risk. Seeing that she's aware of her limitations, Break confessed that he wants Alice and Oz to work under him as part of Pandora, since the organization is looking for the citizens of Baskerville, who are also the people that sent Oz to the Abyss. And since Oz was involved in whatever their plan was, Break decided to have him too. To make sure that Oz won't do anything funny, Break reminded him that he won't be able to go back home, since that will put his loved ones in grave danger unless he keeps on pretending that he's already dead. As for Alice, Break expressed his interest in helping her out. Still, that didn't stop the girl from wondering about what's going on between Pandora and the Bakersville, to which Sharon disclosed it by saying that they're both after the same thing. Although the ambiguity of Sharon's answer annoyed Oz and Alice, they quickly forgot about it when they noticed that it's already sunrise. They went to the balcony to see it, followed up by Raven, who gave his hat to Oz, who was assuring Alice that he'll always be by her side. Now that everything is settled, Break gave Oz and Alice their first assignment on that night. According to the reports, there have been murders taking place in Northumbria, and apparently there's an illegal contractor who's behind this mess. As such, Break asked them to go get the perpetrator in exchange for a box of candies, which Oz was about to accept like the ambitious donkey that he is. Alice, however, stood against the idea as she was sympathetic to her fellow illegal immigrants. Break tried to approach her to explain himself, only for Alice to lash out at him like,
Mr. Chief, face the camera.
much to Break's sadness, as if he did nothing wrong. Still, Oz tried to persuade her by telling her that she might find some lead to her memories there, with Break backing him up on that, but he couldn't resist the urge to roast Alice. Despite her anger, Alice decided to quote the mature person of the bunch unquote, before acting like your average French royalty when treating her subjects. Oz was glad to see how Alice is getting used to the real world that fast. However, Break made sure to tell the boy that he shouldn't trust Alice too much, since she cannot be considered as an ally due to her ambiguous personality. Oz seemed to agree on the fact that he shouldn't trust people that are having secrets from him, such as the Rainsworth, much to Break's surprise. Oz and Alice left for the mission at first light on a carriage, accompanied by Raven. They arrived in town that evening, but it didn't take them long to run into trouble. As Alice lagged behind after falling in love with some kebab sticks, it took Raven and Oz a while to figure out that Alice is out of sight, so he asked Oz to stay where he's at as he searches for Alice. As he waited, he saw a young girl selling flowers getting pushed down by an aristocratic lady, before her husband apologized for her and offered to buy a flower as a compromise, even though his expressions and behavior says he has ulterior motives. Once the creep is gone, Oz decided to step in to help the girl to help her gather her thrown flowers, and definitely not to demonstrate his rizzing skills, and he could have done more if it wasn't for the arrival of his fake father. I mean Raven, who seemed to learn that Alice is enjoying the food of her Turkish overlords. Oz excused himself to regroup with his team to a local restaurant, where he enjoyed seeing Raven and Alice arguing, before noticing the uncanny resemblance between Raven and Gilbert. Later that night, Alice was already annoyed at how carefree Raven and Oz seemed. However, Oz was so concerned about the reason that makes illegal immigrants commit murder, as well as what they gain from sealing such contracts in the first place. Raven responded that these chains seek to change their past, hoping that that will get them to change their present how they want. However, the chains will keep on feeding on their human hosts through the incuse they got on them, and once the incuse finishes rotating on the illegal contractor's body, something might happen. It might come as strange that Raven didn't answer that yet, because he, as well as Oz, turned their attention to Alice, who was sleeping like an actual human. Aware of that, Raven decided to go on a mission while leaving both her and Oz in their room, for now. Amidst all that, cataclysmic events were also taking place in the mansion of that aristocrat that wanted to get freaky with the flower vendor, who now came in and blessed him, as well as all the residents of this mansion, with a bitter taste of karma by getting rid of them all for good. As she was leaving, her chain kept on aiming for Alice, hoping to get unimaginable powers before he ran out of time. Simultaneously, Raven was annoyed that Oz decided to tag along just for funsies. Despite that, Oz found it amusing that Raven is a nice person despite how cynical he may look. Realizing how Oz could see through his tough facade, Raven asked how could Oz come out of the ordeal he's been through, to which the latter answered that his adaptability is his saving grace in such scenarios. As he proceeded to talk about his past experiences and how interested he is in learning more about Alice's identity, just like your average TikTok influencer, and Raven responding to him in an even more fashionable way, a sudden explosion from their apartment alarmed the two to return immediately. Alice knew that there was a chain after her, and she managed to dodge its attack just in time. Now it's time for that low-leveled contractor to pay the consequence. In headquarters, Sharon couldn't help but be upset at how Break refused to hand Oz and the others the picture of the illegal contractor, and not even his reasoning could stop her from being concerned about their safety. Indeed, Oz and Alice were initially caught in a dilemma, which they were saved from thanks to Raven's intervention. To add insult to injury, Oz realized that the host was the girl he was trying to rizz this evening, just like how you figure out that the Thai girl you're rizzing is actually Steven. Still, Raven tried his best to make Oz embrace reality, but Oz got to free himself to free the girl from her succumbing chain, whose time had finally run out. Before he could reach out to the girl, Raven stepped in to prevent him from that, leaving Oz to watch Steven succumb to the abyss in horror. For Break and Sharon, they were aware that one of three things will happen to Oz in a similar situation. He'll get swallowed by the darkness of the incuse, just like Steven did, get imprisoned for life, or find the truth behind his sin. If Oz decides to go with the third option, he'll be able to find a way to save himself from a bleak fate. However, Break also had his own plans for that day, which may not look good for Oz in the long run. The next morning, Oz was too depressed to talk after the traumatic experience they've been through last night. Alice, although she's equally traumatized, she was worried about what may happen to Oz, before suddenly beginning to act all tsundere about Oz being her first contractor ever. Although he was surprised by this, Raven couldn't stop himself from getting into a childish argument with Alice. To add insult to injury, Raven stated that he have to get rid of Alice for good if he had to save Oz from his incuse, which turned the fight from being childish to outright comical at this point. When asked about his opinion on the matter, Oz simply asked them to stop fighting in the carriage. Although Alice and Raven didn't like this answer, Raven noticed how Oz was still thinking of what might have pushed that girl to become an illegal contractor. Elsewhere, the fact that Oz has come back from the abyss has begun to spread. Once they arrived at the mansion, Break was relieved that the hand of the incuse didn't move for now, as he reminded Oz of what awaits him if the hand makes a full turn. Oz was well aware of that, as he kept on spacing out. Sharon noticed that, and broke the silence by asking him what should be done next. For Oz, he decided to bide his time and help Alice more for now, as he knew that Break is looking for a way to remove the incuse. Speaking of Alice, she's doing Alice things basically, much to Oz's disappointment. Nevertheless, he was determined to head back to the old mansion, as he believed that there must be some clues to Alice's memories. When he was a child, Oz used to vent a lot to Gilbert about his daddy issues, and his fear of figuring out why his father hates him so much. Suddenly, Oz found himself in that same white room as before, with Jack lending him a hand from behind a curtain, before finally waking up inside a carriage where Alice was taking a nap next to him. Noticing that the carriage isn't even moving, Oz stepped outside, only to be shocked by how old the mansion actually is, before snapping back into reality by Raven, who came in with a Pandora agent. According to the former of the two, the mansion was put under Pandora's jurisdiction after that fateful day, and since there's some sort of problem is taking place there now, Raven asked Oz to stay in the carriage, while he goes to deal with any potential danger. Before he could excuse himself, however, Raven realized that Oz was having nightmares, so he reassured him that everything will be just fine. As Raven went further away, Oz began to think of how similar he is to Gilbert. His out-loud thinking alerted Alice, who seemed to recognize Gilbert as the guy that Oz had cut with his sword on that event. For Oz, he believed that if Gilbert was here, he would be able to get along with Alice quite easily, due to how similar they are, only to be surprised that Alice is now giving him food. Oz wasn't feeling like eating, as he was too busy reminiscing about the day that his uncle brought Gilbert home for the first time. Although he was weak and had no memories of anything about himself, save for his name being Gilbert that is, Oz decided to keep him as his attendant. Gilbert was surprised that, despite his low status in the Vessalius household, Oz was willing to protect him with his life when a vase was about to accidentally fall on him, albeit it took Oz some convincing to make Gilbert relent to be protected by his new master. I mean, Oz still got Gilbert into some deep trouble every now and then. But Oz is now looking at them with a bit of amusement, as he misses how redeeming qualities Gilbert had despite his timidness, even confessing that he ultimately was the best friend he ever had. Just as Alice expressed that she couldn't comprehend the idea that a weakling like Oz was the one to survive such an ordeal, the two noticed something strange coming their way. But what could it be? Simultaneously, Raven was checking the mansion from the inside. He noticed that the cathedral is full of Pandora agents, but when he approached to question them about some stuff, he realized that they're being used as puppets that are now attacking him. In response, Raven pulled his revolver to defend himself. The shooting was heard by Oz and Alice, so the former decided to head to the cathedral immediately. On his way there, Oz began to realize that something is definitely wrong in this mansion, since it looks very different from what he knew.
Meanwhile,
Raven realized that he's been fighting against a Reaper from Bakersville, which was something he's glad he got the opportunity to fight head-on against them. The Reaper figured that Raven is indeed Gilbert. To make matters worse, Oz heard the whole thing before he could open the cathedral's door, leaving the boy in shock. To add insult to injury, the Reaper kept on calling Gilbert for being obsessive over his master, despite 10 years having passed since his master fell into the abyss. This state of shock that Gilbert and Oz were in has been cut short by Alice's arrival, who broke through like Harley Daviston. What nobody knew was that the Reaper has been trying to lure Alice out, and to make sure that her plan works out, she contracted with a chain for that purpose. Amidst this confusion, Gilbert got caught off guard by Letum, thus turning into a puppet. On top of that, Gilbert found himself unable to look Oz in the eye after having his identity revealed. Oz, who kept on reminiscing about Gilbert's promise from years ago to always be by his side no matter what, couldn't also bear seeing his best friend now being tied down once again, with the Reaper expressing her desire to use him to send Oz back to the abyss. Unfortunately, Gilbert fell under the Reaper's spell once again, and proceeded to beat his master once again. On top of that, Gilbert pinned down Alice, who learned that Oz is Baskerville's key to the Abyss, and since he's a threat to them, they opted to throw him there. Oz tried to resist his puppeted friend with every bit of strength he could, but he was no match for Gilbert, who's now moved by vengeance for the pain he suffered from that slash 10 years ago. Seeing that scar, Oz finally realized that Raven is indeed Gilbert. Realizing that he failed his attendant, Oz held onto the gun barrel and pointed it at his neck and put his hand on the trigger. Seeing this, Gilbert began to get back to his senses. Still, the shot came out of the barrel, but did it hit Oz? Fortunately, the shot did hit the Reaper in the shoulder, thus freeing Gilbert from the strings of the Reaper. Now that her plans are in shambles, the Reaper decided to peace out, and perhaps Gilbert's inability to spread American freedom's teachings to her helped her out in her endeavor. Now that she's gone, Oz noticed that Alice was upset. Gilbert wasn't less upset at Oz if anything, as he believed that Oz was genuinely trying to go for what he had in mind. Oz, however, promptly denied these accusations as he claimed that he knew what he was doing and had no intention of ending everything at that point, and that helped him figure out that Raven is indeed Gilbert. Despite Oz's happiness, Gilbert confessed that he's one of the Nitre family, which has irreconcilable differences with Oz's family, the Vessalius. Despite that, Oz didn't care about any of that, since he wanted to be by his best friend's side no matter what, which made Alice think more of how much Oz valued his friendship with Gilbert. It didn't take long for Oz to find where Gilbert might be, where he began to reminisce with Gilbert about the day they discovered this underground grave. For Gilbert, he didn't want Oz to see him as a changed man, but the former didn't actually care about Gilbert getting taller or becoming more American. For Oz, Gilbert is still the same Gilbert he knew in his childhood, for he still believed in Gilbert's promise to support him until the very end, despite Gilbert's admittance of betrayal. Hearing this, the latter admitted that he wants to be by Oz's side, for better or worse. For Alice, however, things were not going as good, as she began to hear the will of the Abyss telling her that no matter what she does, Alice will always be alone, much to her frustration. While she was trying to get her head clear, she got approached by a rabbit toy dripping in blood that asked her,
"Why are you gay?"
I mean, why are you Alice? Before having its expressions becoming as terrifying as the monster under your bed. Before she could answer that, she found Oz in front of her, asking her to follow him to the grave, where Gilbert is waiting for them. Alice was mad that she was left behind initially, but Oz managed to win her over rather quickly. Probably not. To add insult to injury, Alice reminded Oz that he's being her slave, before asking him to take her there. On their way there, Oz pointed out to his owner that he didn't tell Gilbert about what he knows about the Abyss, just like how she doesn't know much about the real world either. Just as Oz was expressing his desire to get his thoughts together, Alice spaced out while looking at the petals being carried out by the wind, despite Gilbert and Oz's attempts to snap her back into reality. In fact, Alice had indeed some memories in this place, and she's now in the process of recollecting them on the spot. Surprisingly for Oz and his attendant, they were able to see her memories too, as she was running happily to a Jack Vessalius, who Oz, despite being familiar with Jack, is still oblivious to his identity. This time, however, Jack warned Oz that the will of the Abyss is watching him. If you thought that that's the end of it, then you ain't seen nothing yet, son, as what appeared to be reality turned out to be a charade that began to crumble down. Shockingly, Jack knew who Gilbert is, as he asked him to make sure he does his best in protecting Oz. After finding themselves in the Abyss, and Oz expressing his desire to breathe just like George Floyd did, the two proceed in following the sounds of giggles. They were shocked to find Alice unconscious while being shackled to a chair, and a rabbit toy floating and giggling above her. According to Gilbert, that rabbit is a temporary form that the will of the Abyss have taken. The will tried to persuade Oz to keep on playing with her forever and ever. When he refused, its expressions drastically changed, as it began to tear black matter out of its eyes. Gilbert tried to step in, but he got repelled instantly by the will. It proceeded to gaslight Oz into forgetting about Alice, who doesn't even deserve him, and yet had the audacity to take Oz away from it, since she didn't deserve to be born in the first place. Hearing these words, Oz fell on his knees and began laughing, as he made it clear that because he didn't know anything about her, he decided to stay by her side, much to the will's frustration. As it approached Oz to finish him off, only to be finished off by Gilbert from the back at Oz's signal. With the will of the Abyss defeated, the trio escaped the Abyss that evening. Brake was seeing what's going on and informed Sharon of what was happening. Although they didn't expect that the will of the Abyss would get involved this early, they were pleased that things were going as planned so far. For the will, however, she was still looking forward to having Oz return as soon as possible. When he woke up the next morning, Oz couldn't stop thinking of how awful the words from the will had been. For his part, Gilbert was waiting for his young lord to wake up so he could check on him. Oz was surprised to learn that he's currently in Gilbert's apartment, which is located in the capital. More importantly, however, was Gilbert's frustration at Brake's trickery, which he used Oz in particular to lure the Baskerville's Reaper. However, Brake assured them that he, as well as Sharon, would have intervened if they noticed that anything was spiraling out of control. Still, that didn't stop Sharon and Brake from making fun of Gilbert's devotion to Oz. Understandably, Gilbert couldn't afford to reveal this humiliation to his persistent master, but he was relieved to learn that Oz is now alright. despite being creeped out by the will of the abyss. On an unrelated note, Alice woke up in her own room just to see Brake sliding from under her bed, which made her destroy the room in a panic. When Gilbert arrived to see what's going on, he was apoplectic because of Brake's behavior. Despite that, he was too scared to refuse serving Brake some coffee. I mean, how does Brake look intimidating with this face? Now that both Gilbert and yourself are traumatized for life, Gilbert obliged. While the edgelord is making coffee for Brake, the latter decided to reveal to Oz that Sharon and himself are in fact legal contractors, which explains why they haven't aged at all. According to Brake, there were those that had their bodies stopping completely from aging, but that does not make them immortal in any way, shape, or form. In Brake's case, he pointed out that he might not last for another year, but he doesn't have any intention of giving up on life anytime soon, since he still had the workload of a Japanese worker, much to Alice's disappointment. Aside that, Oz was more interested in learning about what's happening exactly between the Barkersville and Pandora. Instead of answering, Brake asked Oz about what the abyss seemed like, since he, just like the rest of Pandora, believes that chains are weapons created in the abyss, which is why they need to capture its will. To achieve this, Oz's cooperation is needed since he's the key to the abyss. This made Alice begin to recollect about what happened on their encounter with the Reaper. Gilbert, however, couldn't comprehend why were the Bakersville so eager in trying to get rid of him if they knew how valuable Oz is, to which Brake responded that neither he does.
Oh my god, bro. Oh, hell no, man. What the
Now that Brake has revealed everything he knew about the Abyss, he reminded Oz that he's the only one that can solve all the mysteries related to the Abyss as well as controlling it. Despite that, Oz decided that he's going to keep on helping Alice find out her memories despite what Brake told him. After all, Oz cared only about being with Alice and Gilbert for better or worse. Brake wasn't buying it, so he approached the boy and asked him where he was. Alice erupted in laughter as she heard this, but Brake decided to call it quits for now and leave through a closet, leaving both Gilbert and Alice stunned. While the two kept on calling for Brake through that empty closet, Oz was thinking of Brake's question, when suddenly he felt an excruciating pain through his chest. Brake knew what's happening from afar. The clock started ticking. Amidst his struggle, Oz found a white-haired maiden named Echo standing in front of him, before putting a bouquet of black flowers on the ground and leaving. As she went out of sight, Oz noticed that the pain had stopped entirely, and was even more horrified when he noticed that the clock started ticking. Brake noticed that from afar, and he began to wonder whose time is going to run out first. Gilbert saw Oz in such a sorry state, so he approached him with Alice to check on him. As he saw his best friend concerned, Oz began to recall Gilbert's statements about what needs to be done to revoke the contract. Instead of telling him about what happened, Oz dismissed the whole thing. Alice, however, noticed the bouquet of black roses with a message falling from it. Gilbert inspected it and was alarmed to what is written in it. Instead of informing Oz of its content, Gilbert dismissed it as nothing, opting to go get some ingredients for dinner instead, since Alice is getting so hungry that she began to eat those black roses.
Don't eat my plants. Don't eat my plants.
As they did, Alice alerted Oz that there's some awesome looking meat he should see. Although Oz was willing to help, Gilbert wasn't. Frustrated by how rigid the latter was, Alice decided to get the meat by herself, and it's definitely not the meat you're thinking of. Not wanting to lose track of her, Gilbert relented to her. Before he does, he assured Oz to not take what Brake told him to heart, since most of his predictions end up being wrong. Before Gilbert gets any more upset at Brake, Oz assured him that he'll also be fine on his own for now. The brief moment of silence between the two have been cut short by Alice's scream from afar, which made Gilbert head there immediately, leaving Oz to be thinking of his actual thoughts on what Brake has previously told him. In the back of his head, Oz kept on telling himself that Brake is wrong, and that there's nothing wrong with him. Alice wasn't too far from what Oz has been thinking, and Gilbert was made aware of that after asking her about it. In fact, he also learned that Alice can't remember a thing about who her parents were, to which Alice was deeply disappointed, so much that she asked about why parents would give birth to a life if they were going to abandon it. Seeing that Gilbert is unable to answer that for her, she considered asking Oz for an answer, but Gilbert stood against the idea before taking her to a remote location. Not wanting to talk about the details of his master's issue with his parents, Gilbert tried to persuade Alice from asking Oz her question, which made her begin to insulting Oz outright, thus leading to a fight that can be summed up in this scene. Nah, just kidding. There was just a brief standoff, where Alice broke it by relenting to Gilbert's demand, since she admitted that she can't insult Oz without knowing everything about him, much to Gilbert's annoyance. As for Oz, although he was concerned that the other two are taking too long to get back, he was even more concerned about another young aristocrat being bullied for carrying his mother's picture in a pocket watch. Fortunately for the boy, Oz came in just in time to save him, by outright terrifying the bullies. Now that the aristocrat is safe, Oz couldn't stop himself from mentioning how pretty the kid's mom is. Unfortunately for the kid, she passed away long ago, but the saving grace for him was his father, who made sure to make him never feel lonely, despite their financial difficulties. To Oz, hearing that the kid has a dad left him speechless due to his past, but remained pure-hearted to feel good for the boy. That was the case at least until the boy asked him about his own parents. Oz froze, before confessing that his mother passed away long ago, but his father left him a long time ago that he can't even remember his face anymore. Although he remained kind to the boy, Oz couldn't help but feel bitter towards the absence of his father from his life, since he lived under the illusion that his father might come back to praise him one day. As he was studying one day, he couldn't help but tease Gilbert, who asked him to rest. Oz was incredibly optimistic that year, since he was, just like Gilbert and everyone else, were expecting his father to come back, which is why he's been more eager to work harder than before. And says also a lot about why Gilbert is so drawn by his aura, despite acting childish occasionally. Despite all that, Gilbert was always worried that Oz might snap if all the tensions he had came to bite him in the ass eventually. Unfortunately, that fear came to reality when Gilbert decided to prove to his master that his father loves him by asking him directly, only to be met with the following answer: that child should never have been born. Gilbert wasn't willing to take that as an answer, only to be pushed down by Oz's father. Oz tried to plead to his father to not fire Gilbert, only to be insulted by his father, leaving the young Oz to be scarred for life. Although Gilbert was imprisoned for a brief while, he was eventually released. But when he checked on his young master, he found him to be a shell of his former self. Gilbert cried while apologizing to Oz, but the latter assured that Gilbert had done nothing wrong, and that's how things have always been. Back to the present time, Gilbert decided to get back to where Oz is, when suddenly Alice detected a presence of an entity from the abyss. It would turn out that this contractor is Echo, who has re-encountered Oz around the same time. Oz was happy to see her, that he was about to demonstrate his rising skills, only for Echo to turn him down instantly. Without further ado, Echo presented herself as a servant of the Nitrays who came in to retrieve the missing child, and that she'll get rid of Oz if he doesn't hand him over. Elsewhere, Break informed Sharon that he came back in his usual fashion, which did understandably upset a Pandora agent called Rhyme. Now entering a house from under a table is unacceptable, but stealing Rhyme's sweets is a whole new level is unacceptable. Despite that, Rhyme came in to talk about the escape of a chain that Pandora used to detain. Ironically, however, it was Rhyme that was supposed to watch over it. Understandably, Break couldn't resist the urge to mock Rhyme for his incompetence, until Rhyme asked Rhyme to not think much of what Break is saying. In fact, Pandora agents are still conducting research, but there's no luck in finding where Grimm is. For his part, Break immediately assumed that Grimm might be in the capital Reveille, where Oz and the others are. Speaking of Oz, the situation he was in evolved from terrible to comical, as Echo outright terrified the young Philippe so much that he ran away instead of complying to her threat. Oz tried time and time again to prevent her from capturing Philippe, only for Echo to threaten him of elimination. As she was about to begin, she noticed that Gilbert's hair had fallen off of Oz's hand. Oz capitalized on that moment and began to brag about himself being Gilbert's master, which made Echo apologize to him, since she can't afford to be punished by Lord Vincent Nitray. Before Oz could know who this Vincent is, Echo dismissed herself, for she was after an illegal contractor, whose name is Philippe, which Oz realized in horror.
Meanwhile,
Gilbert urged Alice to prioritize heading back to where Oz is, but Alice refused, as she was certain that she's after a chain, and she's not willing to let go of it if it had fragments of her memories. When Gilbert tried to protest against such a decision, it was too late. The chain arrived, and there's no way they can leave without defeating it. Elsewhere, Oz has been running after Echo as he tried to persuade her from taking down a young child, only for her to leer, just like Oz, that Philippe isn't an illegal contractor, and that the host of the rampaging chain is another different person, who's in fact Philippe's father, who's now engaged in a fight with Gilbert and Alice.
What? Bro, what are you talking about, man?
For her part, Alice knew the chain and was annoyed that Grimm the Chain wanted to consume her to make the will of the Abyss happy, so much so that she declared that she'd rather dance naked in front of Break instead of being eaten.
What?
As she asked Gilbert to release her power, they realized something important. Oz is missing, so Gilbert won't be able to do so without Oz. Realizing how hopeless their situation is, Alice and Gilbert ran away while insulting each others. They were saved by Echo's arrival, who began to fight with Grimm instantly, and not even Gilbert's attempts to stop her could make her change her mind. Well, perhaps being thrown away could do the job. Anyway, Oz arrived in the middle of this upheaval only to realize the real scale of the predicament. He is now forced to get rid of the father of a friend he made a moment ago. This daunting task made Oz unable to react to Grimm's attack. For Echo, she tried to stand up and fight, only to find herself falling back to sleep, just like how you fall back to sleep right after waking up. However, her Lord Vincent Nitray was there to tell her to watch the fight for a little longer, because things were about to get spicy.
Blood alone moves the wheels of history!
What Grimm didn't know was that Gilbert intervened just in time to save Oz and unleash Alice's powers. Although Alice was doing well, Oz didn't want another contractor to lose his life. As such, he tried to persuade Alice from killing the chain, only to get injured by it. As he began to remember what Jack told him, Oz ordered Alice to stop, But will his order make a difference? Surprisingly, it did. Alice was shocked by this, as she never knew that Oz is capable of controlling her. In the back of his head, Oz kept on recollecting how he promised Philippe to bring back his father alive, but now he's full with frustration at the terrible things that the old man was doing. To add insult to injury, he threatened Oz with a gun he had on his back this entire time. Oz, however, kept on limping towards the contractor despite being shot time and again. When asked about why he decided to become an illegal contractor, the old man answered that it was all for his son's sake, as he was hoping to change his past by not signing the contract that lost him their standings. The old man confessed that he committed heinous atrocities just for the sake of his son, but Oz kept on limping towards him in complete silence. When he reached out to the old man, he began to ask him about why he's not spending time with Philippe instead, only for the old man to lose his ability to answer questions, as he realized that his son was happy for his dad to be by his side despite hardships. Just as Oz was about to hand over a photograph that fell from the man's pocket, Gilbert woke up and saw that his master was in danger. He pulled his revolver and was about to shoot. Oz ordered him not to which Gilbert obliged. However, the old man got shot dead, thus making him and the chain fall down into the abyss, and shattering Oz's hopes of bringing the old man to his son along with it. If that wasn't bad enough, Oz completely lost control over himself, as Alice's full powers were unleashing once again, and they could have caused significant harm to Oz if Gilbert didn't come in clutch to save the day. Oz, however, was mad at Gilbert, as he accused him time and again for shooting the old man earlier. Gilbert defended himself until Velvet Nitre emerged from the shadows and admitted that he did, as he saw that Oz was in grave danger and that there's no other way to save him. After a brief moment of silence, Gilbert decided to take Oz to Vincent's carriage that is located nearby, and not even Oz's persistence on meeting Philippe could make him change his mind. Of course, Vincent was kind enough to take the team back to the Ransworth mansion, since Oz threw a tantrum inside the carriage against heading to the Nitres. Although he wanted to talk a little more to Gilbert, Vincent had to excuse himself, since a certain clown wasn't so eager to have him around. He was right, as Brake couldn't help but express his disdain for Vincent, who found that bashful side of Brake to be adorable. For Gilbert, however, he kept on self-blaming himself for not doing well enough to protect his master, who threw himself in danger despite the gravity of the situation he was in. Fortunately for him, Sharon came in to express her admiration for Gilbert's devotion to Oz, but also reminded him of the importance of revealing his true identity to Oz.
Meanwhile,
Oz kept on remembering with bitterness his encounter with Philippe's father and began to reflect it on his own father when suddenly joined him out of nowhere. She was impressed that Oz could get this upset, which turned out that neither was sure if Oz was really upset. The latter in particular didn't care much about that, as he was more concerned about his promise to Philippe, which Alice reminded him to not get himself involved with this any further, since none of what happened was his fault in the first place. Still, Oz kept on agonizing over Philippe's loneliness, which made Alice resonate with it. By now, the Nitres have reached the mansion's hall, where Vincent learned that Brake was about to head to Pandora by the time they came in. In fact, Brake was going to investigate corruption he was suspecting in Pandora that made Grimm escape the abyss, and in order for this traitor to eliminate traces of treason, he killed Grimm under the guise of not having an option. By now, both Brake and Vincent knew what each one is talking about, but neither revealed his true colors, even when Brake made it clear that he'll hunt down that traitor no matter what. Alice also expressed the same ominous feeling towards Vincent when Gilbert came in to talk about Vincent, who turned out to be Gilbert's younger brother. It all started 10 years ago when Gilbert got adopted by the Nitres. He was hoping that he'll be able to get the Raven chain. According to Gilbert, there were not people that could remember, save for himself, Oz, and the Reapers, who are actually messengers from the abyss. After surviving the ordeal, Gilbert ran away as he was consumed with disbelief and bitterness. After all, his master is now gone forever. His fortunes would change after encountering Brake, where he, just like Sharon did with Oscar, mentioned that the Nitres want to adopt Gilbert. Oscar refused the offer, only for Sharon to tell him that Vincent Nitre had also been adopted 5 years ago after being found unconscious and injured, just like Gilbert. Ever since then, Vincent has been searching for his missing older brother, whose name is Gilbert. Gilbert himself refused the offer too, for the bad blood between the Nitres and the Vessalius families. Brake knew that Gilbert was going to say that, so he tried to manipulate the boy by assuring him that that would get him to rescue his master, only for Gilbert to respond by pushing Brake, which revealed that the latter has a missing eye, which terrified Gilbert. However, Brake didn't hold a grudge and insisted that there's more for Gilbert to gain by accepting the adoption to save his master, which made the boy relent. Gilbert will get all the help needed from Brake to save Oz. In exchange, Gilbert will serve as Brake's eye inside the Nitre dukedom. To put it bluntly, Brake wants Gilbert to use him to the best of his ability, just like he's trying to use Gilbert. On their way out, Brake couldn't resist teasing Sharon for being a perfect match for Gilbert. However, he was confident that the boy will agree to the offer. Indeed, Oscar was shocked to learn that Gilbert had left the mansion without a word, marking the beginning of his own journey among the Night Rays. In the Night Rays mansion, Gilbert was accompanied to Vincent's room, where he was stunned by the striking resemblance of the young Vincent to Oz, so much that he refused to shake hands with him. Vincent seemed to recognize the issue, so he hugged his brother and assured him that everything is alright, while reminding him that he missed him so much. At that moment, Gilbert remembered what Brake had told him to do and began to act accordingly. Since then, Gilbert was welcomed into the Night Ray family as he ate alongside Vincent, fished together, slept, and even studied together. In one of their studying sessions, Gilbert asked Vincent about the Raven Chain, where he turned out to know about it. According to Vincent, each of the 4 dukedoms is keeping a dangerous monster of their own, which has been obtained from the Abyss, just like they did with their powers. As the 2 boys discussed that, they reached the gate of the Abyss, where Gilbert noticed that it's closed. But the moment he touched the gate, Gilbert found himself inside the Abyss, surrounded by shackles and standing in front of a large chain called Raven. At that moment, Gilbert kept on hearing from Vincent that the 4 dukedoms have worked together to research the Abyss, manage all the illegal contractors, and keep watch over each other. Before Gilbert could even react to the giant Raven, Vincent snapped his brother back into reality as the older brother nearly lost himself to the Abyss. More importantly, Vincent pointed out that Gilbert might be able to save Oz if he can manage to sign a contract with Raven. Hearing this, Gilbert became more determined than ever to save his friend, so he decided to head back and sign that contract with Raven. In addition to that, Gilbert kept in mind Brake's note about the striking difference between Oz and Vincent, and that due to the Night Rays' involvement in underworld activities, Gilbert's hands will become bloodstained. Despite that, Gilbert remained focused on his ultimate goal, although the dirty work, the rumors circulating around the Night Rays, and his responsibilities as a potential successor of the Night Rays did affect his mental health. Now that he's a grown-up young man, Gilbert met with Brake in a public park. The former was impressed that Gilbert managed to become a legal contractor and obtain Raven, despite being sent as a spy for Brake. Brake proceeded to declare that the time to rescue Oz has came.
Oh my God! Okay, it's happening. Everybody stay calm.
Which made Gilbert go a little emotional. Despite Brake's warnings about his loyalty's double-edged nature, Gilbert remained as zealous as ever to the cause, and the rest is history. Back to current times, Gilbert realized that both Oz and Alice had fallen asleep while hearing his life story. As he attended to his master, however, Gilbert was reminded of Brake's warnings. In the background, Oscar overheard the entire story and moved on, where he encountered Brake in the corridor. After a brief friendly discussion, Oscar handed over some important documents that Brake had been looking for, which discusses what Oz had seen during the event 10 years ago, thus confirming Brake's doubts that lead to the lost memories from 100 years ago. The next morning, Oscar was surprised to learn that the trio had made for town earlier so they could retrieve Gilbert's missing hat. Seeing how eager Oscar has been to meet his nephew for the first time in a decade, Sharon suggested that he accompany Brake to town, since the latter has some business to attend there anyway. Oscar saw through Brake's charade and knew that he's up to something. Indeed, Brake did admit that he's up to something big, and that he wants to oversee how things will go. In town, Oz's pacifism has gotten Gilbert and himself in an arm wrestling with some of the locals.
I say the whole world must learn of our peaceful ways.
Gilbert was not pleased with this turn of events, but Oz assured him that they'll win. As for Alice, she's pretty much getting treated like a cute cat by the locals. Oz was the first to go. He pointed out to his opponent that he's nothing but a frail and weak little boy. But before they begin the round, Oz whispered something to his opponent, so much that when the round began he was so terrified that Oz won without a sweat, leaving everyone else impressed. Gilbert was the second to go, but he wasn't as eager to participate, especially when he thought he's going up against a woman. Little did he know that this woman seduced Oscar and got him to do all the dirty work for her. Gilbert tried to run away, but he was brought back to the challenge. Despite Gilbert's betrayal for the Vessalius dukedom, Oscar didn't hold a grudge. Instead, he was glad to see Gilbert grow into a handsome-looking young man, as well as defeating him in this challenge. If losing wasn't enough, Alice's humiliation to him made him feel even worse about himself.
You're still a failure! Failure! I can smell the failure!
When it came to her turn, Alice found herself against Buggy from One Piece, where although she struggled a little initially, Alice came out ultimately victorious in this challenge, thus getting Gilbert's hat, albeit it was mostly thanks to Gilbert releasing and sealing back her powers at will. What impressed Oz the most, however, was the genuine happiness on Alice's face after winning, which made him blush in return. After the match was done, Oscar finally got the opportunity to finally welcome Oz with open arms, while pointing out that neither Oz nor Gilbert have caused him any trouble in the aftermath of the event a decade ago. As for Alice, she came back happily with lots of food as gifts to her to celebrate her victory, until she saw the intimate moment between the three, which made her take a detour. After a while of running away, she found herself ambushed by a certain clown, where both of them got attacked by a cat chain. Oz also got to the same location a while later as he was looking for Alice, until he ran into her food and Break's doll. In her fragmented memories, Alice remembered that she's always chasing after Jack Vessalius. Although she couldn't remember who he was, she woke up to find herself with Break in a Cheshire Cat's home. For his part, Break was glad that Cheshire took interest in Alice so much that he kidnapped him as well, much to the annoyance of our cat girl. Amid her anger, Alice got saved by Break twice, as he reminded her that Cheshire took her to get rid of her in his own turf, for she's hated by the will of the abyss. While he kept on informing her more about this chain that they're stuck against, Break took Alice and began to run away with her, since it's a gentleman's duty to protect a lady. Despite his courtesy, Alice kept on beating the clown, until she suddenly felt that there's a different fragment of her memories in this dimension. Once they reached a safer space, Break began to reveal what he knew about Alice so far. According to him, Alice doesn't need to consume humans because she doesn't need to, just like Cheshire. As such, despite their different races etc., Alice and Cheshire share their close connection to the will of the abyss. Despite this conclusion, Break still had something to say to Cheshire. When they entered the cat's room, Alice was frightened, as the will of the abyss began to plant the seeds of doubts into looking for her past memories. Despite Break's best attempts to wake her up, Alice was way too scared to snap back into reality. Before he could follow her, Break got dragged inside a mirror by his past self.
Meanwhile,
Oz learned from Sharon what Break has been up to, assuming that he does know what he's doing. Despite that, Oz thought it'd be best to follow him and Alice up. Gilbert and Sharon quickly agreed, so Sharon decided to take the master and his servant there. Gilbert opposed the plan, but Oz insisted that he carry on as Alice's servant, and due to his unwavering belief in Break's plan. And with that out of the way, Sharon began the ritual to head to the Cheshire dimension by using her own chain, where both Oz and Gilbert got through instantly, as they remained oblivious to what awaits them there. Elsewhere, Vincent was aware of the developments that were taking place, and was glad to see the situation play itself out, since that's in his best interest. Back to Alice, she snapped back into reality in front of a black cat, as she began to remember that that cat used to be her friend. When Oz woke up inside the Cheshire Cat dimension, he was frightened by the room he found himself in, as well as Sharon being able to contact him through his shadow. To make matters worse, since Break has gone missing, Oz and Gilbert are very likely to be sent somewhere random. Before Oz could say a word, Gilbert saved him instantly from a sudden attack, which became clear that it was Cheshire attacking them. When they began to ask each other about their purpose here, Oz learned about what happened to Break. As for why Cheshire is doing all this, it was because he wants to eliminate the enemies of the will of the abyss. Although he didn't expect Break nor Oz and Gilbert to show up, Cheshire was eager to get rid of them all nevertheless. Oz felt threatened, but Gilbert was so frightened he couldn't even move, as he was an ailurophobe, much to Oz's dismay. Just as Cheshire was about to finish the seemingly helpless two, Sharon's chain merged out of Oz's shadow, which turned out to be a black unicorn. As such, Oz and Gilbert took the opportunity to leave the room and leave all the fighting for Equus. Despite the stalemate in Cheshire's dimension, Sharon was left alone in the real world, thus making her vulnerable. Oz and Gilbert, however, were completely unaware of that, as they kept on running over the domain, until they found Alice in front of them. Gilbert knew that this was a hoax, so he pulled the American living inside him and shot the fake Alice. However, they were surprised to see that Cheshire had caught up to them, where he pointed out that this entire domain is made from Alice's memories. Noticing that Gilbert had made a contract with Raven, Cheshire attacked the host and had him thrown off the balcony, before proceeding to pin down Oz. When he learned that Oz is merely helping Alice get back her memories for the sake of helping her out, Cheshire was furious, as he believed that Alice hated her memories so much that she shattered them. He also added that there's only one memory fragment of Alice that exists in this dimension, while the rest are all in the real world, where he's tasked with guarding that fragment. Meanwhile, Alice managed to catch up to Jack, albeit she still couldn't recognize him, but she knew that once she does, she might be able to know what she is. In Panera HQ, Oscar was surprised to learn that the meeting he was supposed to attend had been postponed, but perhaps got even more surprised when he saw himself stepping on Vincent, who was sleeping like a baby on the corridor's floor. Once he got to sit with Oscar and Rhyme, he got alarmed by the ladder that his chained dormouse is floating around. Once Vincent was done talking about how his chain gets him to sleep whenever he's not in control, he mentioned that he was indeed invited to the meeting, since he had to give a report regarding Grimm. After all, he was the one that eliminated him instead of capturing him alive. Vincent also mentioned that he made sure to not mention anything regarding Oz in the report, since Pandora's reaction to such an event might be terrible. Oscar was assured when he heard this, until he realized that Rhyme, who's a Pandora agent, was literally with them and heard everything. While Rhyme kept on panicking, Vincent decided to discuss the entire matter with Oscar over a game of chess. During the game, they talked about the history of the Baskervilles, whom the Four Dukedoms eradicated at some point. After all, the Baskervilles have caused the Sablier tragedy under the leadership of Glenn Baskerville. If it wasn't for Jack Vessalius' leadership of the Four Dukedoms, the town might have easily fallen into the abyss. However, the main objective of Pandora remained obtaining the will of the abyss, and in order to do that, Pandora still needs the fifth gate of the abyss, which the Baskervilles still holds. The ladders are also seeking to obtain the other 4 keys from the other dukedoms, for the exact same reason as Pandora. As for why Vincent didn't reveal Oz's return, Vincent gave no answers whatsoever, instead opting to leave the room and change topic, before hitting them with another. On a serious note, Vincent pointed out that Gilbert requested that he does that, and Vincent obliged. And with the question now answered, Vincent bid Oscar and Rhyme farewell. On the other hand, Gilbert miraculously survived the fall and found himself inside of Alice's memory. As he kept on walking, he ran into a twisted piece of Alice's memories. Instead of getting rid of it this time, he followed it while remembering a previous conversation he had with Brake, where Gilbert was forbidden from ever harming Alice. Just as he lost track of Alice, Gilbert was alerted to the familiar sound of Oz's pocket watch, only to find Jack Vessalius sitting behind him. According to Cheshire, despite Alice's happy look on the outside, she was sad and alone on the inside, or at least, that was the case until she had her eyes on Jack Vessalius.
Meanwhile,
Although he was getting beaten, Oz was surprised to see Cheshire beginning to act like a casual cat by grooming himself. Not being able to resist the urge of mocking the feline for his behavior, Oz thought it best to complain to his owner about what he has been doing so far. Although he's still getting beaten, Oz didn't stop these silly threats. Just as Cheshire was about to finish off the young boy, Jack emerged from behind the mirror to save Oz, as he reminded the cat that it wouldn't be in his best interest to eliminate him while pulling Oz back. Before Cheshire could even respond, he learned that Brake is appearing in the mirror behind him. Oz was fortunate to be finally brought to safety where Gilbert was relieved to see him, only for the latter to be jumped on by Oz. Once this meeting was over, Jack proceeded to formally present himself to Oz. For his part, Oz recognized Jack from Alice's memories. Since Jack doesn't have much time to spare to answer all of Oz's questions, Jack requested help from Oz to save Alice before she gets swallowed whole in this dimension. Oz quickly acquiesced. For starters, they need to figure out where she is. In order to do so, Jack requested Oz to think about Alice deep within his heart and call her name. At the same time, Cheshire managed to get in Brake's memories, where he witnessed the young Sharon running to her mother, where Brake was lying unconscious on her lap. Just as he began to approach the peaceful bunch, he was taken aback that Sharon and her mother were twisted illusions. According to Jack, for Cheshire, just like the Will of the Abyss, Brake's powers are a powerful poison that they should avoid no matter what. And in order to ensure he becomes the sole protector of the Will of the Abyss, Cheshire must eliminate Brake. Oz was astonished to learn about this, but even more astonished when Jack mentioned that he's after the same objective as Cheshire and Alice. When asked about what Alice is to him, Oz began to idolize her like the simp that he is. Jack got so emotional by the speech that he managed to locate Alice, thus sending Oz to keep her company, since rabbits can die from loneliness. When Gilbert got so worked up at not being sent with his master, Jack revealed that he's just a piece of Jack's soul in Alice's memory fragment. Simultaneously, Cheshire's persistence in attacking Brake resulted in losing an arm. Seeing how tenuous his situation is, Cheshire retreated back into his dimension. However, things were not over for him, because Brake managed to follow him through the mirror. This time, Brake summoned his own Chain Mad Hatter to pay Cheshire back for the terrible dream he had shown him in the abyss. Oz began immediately in searching for Alice, until he found himself stuck eventually between fire in front of him and corpses laying down in a pool of blood. Amidst his horror, Jack called Oz to inform him that he's seeing the aftermaths of Sablier's drop in the abyss by the Baskerville. Most shocking part of all for Oz, aside from the harrowing details, is that this space has been created by Alice's memories. After all, she was at the center of the tragedy from 100 years ago. As became aware of the outcome of this memory, Oz began rushing his way to find Alice.
Meanwhile,
Gilbert threatened Jack in the most American way possible to get his way to his master. Jack, however, calmly advanced and took off the gun from Gilbert, while trying to get him to remember who he was. Amid his pursuit for Alice, Oz found a young boy crying while surrounded by corpses. To his surprise, this kid resembles Vincent, but perhaps Oz got shocked even more when he heard the child saying that he did what he did for Gilbert's sake. Before Oz could figure out anything, Vincent stood up and began to laugh menacingly as everything and everyone below him were burning, before jumping into the fire himself, respawning and beginning to run away like Klee from Genshin Impact. Oz followed suit, while questioning himself about the true age of Gilbert and Vincent. The more he thought about it, the more things began to make sense to him. Gilbert and Vincent must have fallen into the abyss and escaped it a century later, just like Oz did recently. Gilbert, for his part, couldn't remember any of this, nor he cared about remembering. Hearing this, Jack stopped trying, as he knew that what happened to Gilbert and Alice on that day must have scarred them for life. As the mansion began its self-destruction, Oz got back to running after young Vincent, who now passed to running in the garden's corridor until they reached an abandoned tower. Oz entered it when he began to hear Alice calling out for him, so he followed the voice. Now here are two news. The good one is that Oz found Alice. The bad news, however, is that she got stabbed the moment he arrived. It was only then that he learned from Jack that Alice was a human, before getting brutally murdered. Horrified by this sight, Oz couldn't do anything but sit in shock, before the accused hands began to move again. Its effects were so huge that it began to make the entire Cheshire dimension begin to crumble. Even Brake did put a halt in his holy crusade against cats, as he became aware of what has been going on. Jack, on the other hand, didn't know what's going on with Oz, who he kept on hearing him scream from the excruciating pain he kept on getting. He only calmed down when he heard Alice calling out for him, so he stood up and began to follow her voice, despite all of her memories collapse. Despite seeing the scale of the destruction, Gilbert could not believe that Oz was capable of that, until Jack made it clear that Oz could do that, since Alice's powers were sealed in him. However, Jack also was aware of how terrible the situation is now, so he decided to send Gilbert to save his master. Cheshire also became aware of the gravity of the situation and decided to bail, but Break wasn't so eager to let the cat go, which forced Cheshire to spill the beans about Oz's ability of breaking this dimension. Still, that did not stop Break from pulling his sword and delivering the coup de grace to the stray cat. Elsewhere, Gilbert kept on searching for his master until he found him standing right in front of him. He was shocked to see that Oz wasn't being himself, so he gave him a bar of Snickers to snap back into reality.
Have a Snickers, will you?
You're not you when you're hungry.
Well, it didn't work out, as Oz began to express his ability to hear Alice's sad voice. Despite his attempts to assure her that he'll get her rid of anything that saddens her, Alice began to open up about her worries and insecurities, as she believed that she's afraid of her own existence more than anyone or anything else. Hearing this, the already possessed Oz began to destroy everything in his wake for Alice's sake. Gilbert, however, finally had enough and decided to slap Oz and remind him of his actual objective to save Alice, which finally brought the kid back into reality, thus saving the entire dimension. Although he managed to pacify Cheshire, Break also suffered, as he began to vomit blood from using his powers. Seeing that the feline is still eager to fight despite losing an arm and a leg, Break revealed that he now possesses his beloved ring, which made the feline ascend into a terrifying demon. Simultaneously, the crumbling domain revealed to Oz and Gilbert where Alice is, but the time to reach out and save the girl. Not wanting to waste time, Oz began to move forward. Gilbert tried to stop him, but the falling ceiling stood between him and his master. To his horror, Oz nearly fell off the stairs when it broke, but he managed to stand his ground and get back to run for his owner. For her part, Alice didn't want anyone to save her, but when she woke up, the shackles that had been tying her disappeared, thus falling into Oz's embrace. Gilbert also came in clutch just in time to save a happy Oz and a sad Alice that couldn't hold her booger from coming out of her nose. This moment of happiness couldn't last for long, however, as Break and Cheshire arrived on the scene too. After Break finished explaining what went wrong with Cheshire, Oz recalled what Jack had been saying about Cheshire's devotion to be the sole protector of the will of the abyss, but he was ultimately unable to stop Break from finishing off Cheshire, who began to call out for Alice as his precious owner. Hearing this, Alice began to recall who Cheshire was before being forced outside the dimension with Oz by Sharon. Despite Oz's pleas to take Gilbert and Break out of the domain too. Although the horrors in the Cheshire dimension were over, Oz found himself with Alice's rabbit form in the middle of a Pandora meeting. Seeing that other agents have come into the scene with guns in hand, Alice thought it's best to get rid of them all. Oz, however, had a different approach, which has been achieved, albeit by forcing their way through. Oscar saw what's going on, so he stopped Rhyme that arrived just now to tell him about what happened and back Oz in his stead, assuming that no one in Pandora knows that Rhyme has previous knowledge of Oz being an illegal immigrant. And you guys know how Pandora would deal with illegal immigrants. Due to her bad blood with Pandora, it would be possible for Alice to start a war with all the contractors in Pandora, which will be problematic. As such, Oscar left the scene while leaving all his responsibilities on Rhyme, just like your father did before abandoning you.
Wait a minute. Wait, first of all,
Rhyme couldn't help but panic when he tried to think of a way to salvage what he could, until he found himself dragged in a room by Break. He noticed the dire state that he and Gilbert were in a terrible state, but couldn't do much about that, since Break was even more concerned about Sharon's safety. Left with no other option, Rhyme decided to tell Break that Sharon had gone missing, and Pandora is now conducting a secret search for her. Rhyme has also mentioned the recent developments with Oz and Alice, which made Break figure out that the seal on Alice's power has been lifted when Gilbert used Raven. Hearing this, Rhyme panicked again and got back to trying to catch Oz. Now that he's all on his own, Break thought of the Oz release and began connecting the dots. As he saw the black roses and knight chess piece on the table of the room Sharon was in, he figured out who's behind this. It was around the same time that Gilbert woke up and rushed to go after his master before he got himself into trouble. Little did he know that Oz is now in front of a horde of Pandora contractors. Oz tried to calm down the situation, but Pandora members were not having any of it, so they decided to shoot immediately. By the time Rhyme arrived at the scene, the die had already been cast. Thinking fast, Oz heard Jack reminding him of his ability to bring back Alice to her human form as he previously did against Grimm. But on top of not knowing how he did that, Pandora began to attack once again, which made Alice retaliate. Left with no other options, Jack took over Oz's body to tame the Berserk girl into being her usual self, much to Pandora's surprise. Since the two are now unable to resist, the contractors ceased all hostilities. Their boss, however, insisted on capturing them both. To everyone's surprise, Oz, who's now possessed by Jack, has kicked the fat loser off the stairs, before assuring the other contractors that Oz means them no harm. When Alice noticed the sudden shift in Oz's demeanor, Jack revealed his his true identity as Jack Vessalius, the man that fought the Baskerville and witnessed the tragedy of Sablier, leaving everyone in front of him in awe. After apologizing to everyone for the confusion, Jack addressed everyone in an impassioned speech about unifying their efforts to prevent the repeat of a second tragedy just like that of Sablier from last century against Glenn Baskerville, who turned out to be still alive to this very day. To make sure everyone is on side, he addressed the skeptics as well by reminding them of the original objective of Baskerville to obtain the will of the Abyss. Rhyme noticed how Jack had been looking at him, so he decided to continue the story in his stead, where he revealed Oz's true identity as he true heir of the Vessalius dukedom, as well as what had happened to him 10 years ago and how he came back. By the time the full truth became revealed, Jack almost collapsed, if it wasn't for Gilbert's quick intervention. Lastly, Jack concluded his speech by reminding everyone that Glenn Baskerville is still alive, and that the rest of his clan are still after the will of the Abyss and himself. As such, Pandora's ultimate objective would be to prevent Baskerville from achieving both objectives at all costs, and that all should abide by Oz's guidance. It was an excellent speech, as every contractor in Pandora obliged immediately. Before handing Oz's body back, Jack apologized to the young boy for taking over without permission, which turned out that Oz was furious at the fact that Jack got all of Pandora now involved, before leaving Oz to deal with the mess he created, while promising him to tell him more about himself, Alice, and Glenn. Most importantly for Jack, he wanted Glenn to be stopped no matter what and be caught alive, since he's an irreplaceable friend of his. While all of these developments were taking place, Brake managed to make his way to Vincent Nitre, stating that he knows that he's behind the kidnapping of Sharon. Brake was in no mood to play around, so he asked Vincent to hand over Sharon. Vincent agreed, as long as Brake hands over the 100-years-old memory of Alice that he stole from Cheshire. The next morning, Oz woke up in shock from the discussion he had with Jack, only to find Alice and Gilbert sleeping like a baby's on the sides of his bed while drooling all over. His relief to see his friend turned quickly into disappointment when he saw Brake calling him out through the window, before agreeing to sit and have some tea with him. The sitting began with Brake apologizing for dragging everyone into this mess, which sounded odd to Oz, as it wasn't the first time that Brake dragged him in such a mess. Brake, however, pointed out that he cannot forgive himself for losing Alice's memory from 100 years ago. Brake knew that Oz learned some new information there, so he decided to exchange what he knew with what Oz had learned so far. After a small break where Alice is kicking Gilbert in the head, we get back to see that Brake has learned all he needed from Oz, as he confirmed that the young boy that Oz has seen is indeed Vincent. Now it's Oz's time to ask about what he doesn't know yet, starting with Brake's motives to know about what happened a century ago. A question that Brake refused to answer, as he believed that won't matter by now, because Oz is now the reborn hero that Pandora is rallying up behind. Seeing that Oz had his own doubts, Brake assured Oz that he's capable of defeating Baskerville. As they were leaving the balcony, Brake warned Oz from Vincent Nitre, since he's certain that he must be involved in the tragedy from a century ago and doesn't want anyone to know about that. For now, Vincent was meeting some friends in the Nitre household. It'll turn out to be that those friends are none other than the Baskerville, a fact unknown to Brake. While changing his clothes, Oz learned about what happened to Sharon and how Brake managed to save her under conditions that he refused to reveal. When they entered Sharon's room, Brake was glad to see that his mistress was well. Sharon couldn't help but begin beating him with a pillow, but Brake never lost his smile despite that. After all, Brake had to comply with Vincent's demand to erase the proof he got from Cheshire's dimension in order to get the antidote that would save Sharon from a grim fate. According to Vincent, that ring bell of Alice maintains its shape through the powers of the Abyss, and since it cannot be destroyed by normal means, so he asked Brake to use his chain Mad Hatter to do so. Despite the oath he made to Sharon's mother, Shelley, Brake decided to oblige to the request. Only then Sharon moved up in a last-ditch attempt to prevent Brake from doing so. Brake, however, saw that Sharon's life is more important than the 100-years-old memory, so he honored his promise. Despite that, Vincent decided to play it dirty by throwing the antidote off the balcony if it wasn't only for Echo's timely intervention. Vincent got so upset that he was about to slap the young girl, only to find Brake standing for her. Despite being aware of that, Sharon was still frustrated at her own inability to defend herself, which led Brake to give up on what he was seeking so far, before getting back to beating the guy. Brake, however, made it clear that his attempt to save her wasn't a selfless endeavor as it seemed, since he would lose his life under Miss Shelley's hands if any harm were to come to Sharon. The latter couldn't help but begin crying at how unfair she found the situation is, while calling Brake as her brother. Oh, haven't we been missing Oz? The boy has been witnessing the whole thing and Sharon didn't even notice his presence in the room apparently.
Do you ever look at someone and wonder what is going on inside their head?
Until he finally got pulled outside the room by Rhyme, who told the boy that that's how Sharon used to address Brake before. After all, Sharon used to consider Brake as her brother, which made Oz begin to wonder more about the Rainsworth's past. Being acquainted with the Rainsworth for a very long time served in Rhyme's best interest in this case, as he began to talk about what he knows about them. According to Rhyme, Brake was less friendly when he first arrived at the Rainsworth, as he didn't smile as much as he does now, if at all. This got Brake lots of backlash from other contractors in Pandora, which made Brake himself unwilling to make any contacts with anyone either, which became evident when he rejected calculated rhymes approach to stop his lost eye from being injured. Fortunately for Brake, that was when Miss Shelley, Sharon's mother, came into the scene and changed Brake eventually with her compassionate heart. Hearing this, Oz began to think about what he actually wants, if Brake was looking for the truth from a century ago, and Alice was looking for her memories. Before he could get an answer to that, Oz got knocked down by Oscar, who opened the door behind him, who needed help urgently. But what's the issue? Before they could get an answer to that question, the trio found themselves wearing white suits and inside a carriage. After a bit of back and forth, Oscar revealed the secret mission they're going for in the Lutwidge Academy, where Ada turned out to be studying there. Before Oz could introduce Ada as his younger sister, Alice assumed that Ada might be some sort of food, before being surprised by this revelation. Oscar, however, had a much more pressing issue to discuss, so he decided to hand the letter he had to Oz to read it. Once he was done, the issue turned out to be that Ada had fallen in love with someone, and Oscar isn't going to let that happen. Gilbert wasn't feeling any better when he heard that, and probably got a lot worse for him when Oscar mentioned that they'll be sneaking their way into university until they confirm whether Ada was telling the truth about it all or not. When Gilbert began to wonder why and how they would sneak in there, Oscar revealed that there's an underground tunnel underneath the institution. Although the rest were surprised by this revelation, they proceeded to sneak their way inside the university, which seemed to be impressive to Oz. Gilbert was uncomfortable with the whole spiel, while Alice remained indifferent to what's happening, but decided to tag along nevertheless. That was the case until they ran into 3 girls coming from around the corner. All was going well until Oscar decided to barge in his usual manner, which creeped the students out, much to Gilbert's outrage. Amid this confusion, they heard a whistle echoing all over the school, so they decided to go into hiding. What they didn't know about, however, is that 2 students, namely Leo and Elliot, have noticed their presence as intruders, and they're about to go after them. Gilbert and Oscar took shelter inside the university's library, where Oscar assured Gilbert that Oz will be fine on his own, since dealing with people is a strong point of his. Before long, Oscar's smoking alerted one of the students to come, with her cat freaking the living poop out of Gilbert. Before long, Oscar figured out who that student was. On the other hand, Oz was doing great with Alice accompanying him, or at least that was mere cover he was putting. A charade that Alice was able to see through, as Oz was in fact reluctant to see his younger sister. After getting beaten by the angry cat girl for calling her sharp, Oz confessed that he's more afraid to meet her, but that doesn't mean that he's not happy about wanting to meet Ada. After all, he was worried that Ada might have forgotten about him during those 10 years. Ada was also thinking the same, only for Gilbert to confidently assure her that Oz would never tell her that. Before we could pass on anything, was it me or the black cat sitting next to Ada is Sakamoto from Nishiju? Heck, it even went to see Alice about to make a romantic confession to Oz, before beginning to kick his face and enforcing her position as Oz's owner. While this comical fight was taking place, Ada arrived at the scene with Gilbert and Oscar following suit, only for the younger sister to see her precious older brother on all 4 with Alice stepping on him and laughing. Although the meeting started awkwardly, both siblings managed to express their actual thoughts about how much they have missed each other in the most wholesome way possible. This isn't Sweet Home Alabama, y'all. I know what you're thinking. Fortunately for you guys, probably, Alice came back in to ruin this family reunion by kicking Oz in the face like Pepsimon, before switching to tell Alice about herself being Oz's mistress, leaving the young Ada confused and Gilbert getting in a fight with her over who has the right to be permanently with Oz. A fight that was concluded by Oscar's intervention to threaten the two. Ada switched then to check on Gilbert and ask him about the hat she gifted to him, which alarmed both Oz and Oscar about its origins and got their panic mode activated. Before Gilbert could get a clue over what the uncle and his nephew were talking about, Oscar decided to ask Ada about the person she fell in love with. Instead of directly answering, Ada began looking at Gilbert, which Oz and Oscar concluded that he's the one, leading to everyone running after one another. Once she found her brother, she was relieved to see her brother ecstatic while reminiscing about the good old days. This brief happy meeting couldn't last for long, however, as Oz got alarmed instantly to a piano cover of the music of his pocket watch. When he got to the piano room, he found no one to play any music and no music to be played, leaving the young boy confused. Fortunately for him, Ada caught up to him just in time to learn about his interest in the melody that was playing earlier. After all, Ada knew that it was Leo and Elliot that were playing it. Although school day was over, Ada believed that they might still be at the library. Elsewhere, Gilbert and Alice were hiding in the garden from the university staff, unlike Oz, who was left in the library by his younger sister for a moment. Oz couldn't help but enjoy his time by checking on his favorite book, Sarai. His excitement was over when he saw that a book from the entire series is missing, which turned out to be taken by Elliot. Although Oz didn't know who Elliot is, he couldn't help but get excited at their shared interest in there, so much so he began to rant about his favorite character from there. Unfortunately for Oz, however, Elliot hated Oz's favorite character to the point he felt like Kendrick dissing Drake. Oh, Elliot also spoiled the end of the story for Oz, which made it feel a lot worse for the young boy. Oz got mad at the spoiler he got, as he forgot about the fact that he was away for 10 years. Elliot, however, did not care about that, which got both himself and Oz to be loggerheads. But before their tensions escalates any further, Leo hopped in from a corner her to put an end to the fight, which was something that Elliot didn't appreciate, especially when he was told to apologize for spoiling the story for Oz. Although Elliot apologized, he did it in a half-hearted manner that did spark tensions once again. Leo tried to calmly stop the squabble again as he reminded Elliot that although he's his attendant, it's also his job to correct his wrongdoings, before expressing his utter disappointment, which nearly got Elliot on his knees. Oz tried to exploit this chance and escape, only to be stopped by Elliot, who asked for him to reveal his name and show his student ID. Before Oz could even respond, Leo figured that he's one of the trespassers. Since he saw that he's harmless, Leo didn't bother informing Elliot about it, much to the latter's frustration. Amid this argument, Ada came into the scene. She tried to introduce her brother, only to get insulted by Elliot for being a Vessalius member. This of course didn't sit well with Oz, who intervened for his sister's sake by provoking Elliot to run after him. When he got all alone, Oz began to think about what could have made Elliot hold a grudge against the Vessalius family. Before he could think of an answer to that, he felt a strange presence around him. Just as he turned around to see who's there, he was relieved to find out that it was his younger sister. Ada couldn't bear to see her brother getting in trouble with Elliot, so she tried to portray the guy in a more positive light. She also asked if Oz had managed to ask Elliot about the tune he heard earlier, which Oz realized that he completely forgot about, so he asked Ada to hold onto his hand to not get lost. Before he could even depart, Oz realized how awkward it is to ask his grown-up younger sister to do so, but Ada didn't mind, as she held onto his hand. This wholesome moment, however, couldn't last for long, as Ada got kidnapped by 3 of the Baskerville. One of them was Charlotte Baskerville. Elsewhere, seeing that the road is empty, Gilbert notified Alice that they're free to move. Before she can say anything, Alice smelled meat, which got her to leave her hideout like a maniac. Left with no other choice, Gilbert decided to follow her, only to find himself surrounded by a horde of fangirls.
Meanwhile,
Alice kept on doing her thing, by eating like there's no tomorrow, much to the joy of people around her. Elliot also was occupied with trying to figure out where Oz is. He found clues that something wrong must have happened to Ada too, but he didn't know what it was. Little did he know that both Ada and Oz got kidnapped by the Baskervilles, namely Charlotte, Fang, and Doug. When asked about why he and his sister were kidnapped, Charlotte and her goons answered that she won't harm him as long as he fulfills Baskerville's request. Ada opposed this, so Charlotte decided to poison the girl. Although he couldn't comprehend the scale of the trouble the Vessalius siblings were in, Elliot still tried to figure out how to reach out behind the wall, until Leo came in and solved the issue just like that. After all, Leo knew that the school used to be a fortress or a prison, so it was natural that it has secret passages. When asked about what to do next, Elliot has his mind set over that. Meanwhile, Oz was put between a rock and a hard place. According to Charlotte, he had to sacrifice his life if he wanted his younger sister to be saved, to which Oz responded that he would sacrifice himself without hesitation if there were no other option. Seeing his determination, Charlotte began to mention how similar Oz is to Jack, before proceeding to mention that she'll only give Ada the antidote if Oz manages to tell them about everything he knows about Jack Vessalius and the tragedy of Sablayer. To Oz's surprise, Charlotte didn't even know why the Baskervilles had committed mass murder back then, nor why their master Glenn ordered them to do so, but she couldn't help but brag about it proudly. When Oz didn't give them the answer they were seeking, Charlotte proceeded in trying to choke Ada, before turning back to Oz to kick him while he's down. Only then Elliot and Leo came into the scene, much to everyone's surprise, since no one knew that Elliot would turn out to know about who the Baskervilles are. Oz tried to persuade Elliot to not get involved, but Elliot got furious at Oz's willingness to sacrifice himself for a promise that is very likely not gonna be fulfilled. Once he was done with chastising Oz, Elliot turned to the Baskervilles and introduced himself as a member of the Nitre family, before catching a sword given to him by Leo. Seeing this, Fang drew his own sword and moved ahead to clash with Elliot. The fighting was intense, but it was all just a diversion, for Leo further distracted the Baskervilles to take Ada with him. Elliot also managed to free Oz and escape with him thanks to that. Fortunately for Ada, the antidote is taking a good effect on her, but they still need to find a way out of this maze that they're stuck in. For Oz, however, he was more concerned about why Elliot decided to get himself involved in his problem, which got the two into another needless squabble. After this saga was solved by Leo beating them both to submission, Elliot still compared Oz to the protagonist of their favorite story, since he tore every loved one around him by his self-sacrifice. Oz, however, had enough of being called out as such, but that didn't sit well with Elliot, who believed that Oz is saving no one but himself by sacrificing himself, which is nothing but a naive thought that the latter was having. After all, Elliot believed that if Oz kept up with his wishful thinking, he would eventually find himself with no one by his side. Hearing this, Oz was left in an utter state of denial that he pushed Elliot back and told him to shove it. In his defense, Oz expressed his self-awareness of being stupid, but in the process, he pointed out that Elliot had no right to barge in without knowing anything about his past of rejection. Hearing this, Elliot decided that their drama had been settled for good. before turning back and pressing his way forward with Leo. Although he followed up, Oz was taken aback by how he was able to tell Elliot about what he never told Gilbert or Oscar about. While the Baskervilles were reorganizing their plans, Oz and the others reached a basement. Just as Ada began to wake up, however, a lion chain hopped in front of them, with Charlotte following suit, as well as Fang and Doug showing up to the youngsters' back to surround them. Fortunately for the boys, Elliot had a sword in his possession already, while Oz managed to pick a nearby sword he found. Their morale was high, but their fighting skills weren't up to par. To their credits, the boys stood their ground and pressed on fighting, even though they kept on being thrown to the ground time and again. When Oz tried to reach out to his sword, he was thrown away once again by the chain. This time, however, Jack came into Oz's rescue by getting Gilbert to remove his seal and Alice to be summoned in her bee-rabbit form. Seeing this, Charlotte figured that Jack Vessalius is finally there. 1 century back, Charlotte used to be one hell of a fanatic devotee for Glenn. As she was about to head to him one day, she nearly eliminated Jack in the process, if it wasn't for Glenn knowing about his presence there. With tensions cooling down, Jack introduced himself to Charlotte as your average music box maker. To everyone's surprise, Jack used to be a carefree soul, who enjoyed himself mostly as the chill guy of the Vessalius house. Although that might seem good to the likes of you and I, none of the Baskerville servants liked Jack and his happy behavior. Charlotte, on the other hand, was furious at his presence inside the Baskerville castle, especially that he was sneaking his way in every day, but only stopped when she learned from him that Glenn had allowed him to use a secret passage to get in the mansion. Hearing this, Charlotte wanted to learn about his connection to Glenn, only for Jack to tell her to ask Glenn herself. Although she considered herself as unworthy of talking to Glenn, she was surprised to know that Jack knows more about the Baskerville than what she knows about Jack himself. But perhaps she was even more surprised to know that Jack and Glenn are actually friends. One day, Charlotte was surprised to see Jack gifting her a pocket watch that functions the same way as a music box. When she asked about the name of the song played, Glenn came out of nowhere and answered that he was the one to compose the track and called it Lacey. As she saw Glenn leaving and Jack following suit, Charlotte stood in amazement over how these two were getting along. Charlotte wanted that these peaceful times would continue. However, Glenn ordered that the capital Sablier must entirely fall in the abyss. Glenn was so determined to go with the plan without further questions, and not even the presence of innocence in town could persuade him from changing his mind. During the tragedy, Charlotte admitted to committing to eliminating countless lives, so much that the red grab of Baskerville turned black. Back to present time, Jack made it clear that he didn't reappear to talk to the Baskervilles, but rather to put an end to their mania. Charlotte, however, wasn't eager to comprehend that what she did was wrong, in a fashion that could be described in the following scene. Jack was upset when he heard that he killed Glenn to succeed in life, so he threatened her by having Alice tear her to pieces if she doesn't leave this very instant, adding that he remained silent until this very second to defend Glenn's honor, and that his vessel will smite them if they doesn't abide to stopping their nonsense. Charlotte, however, wasn't willing to give up on her master's orders. Although she decided to leave, she promised to keep on resurrecting Glenn over and over, and redoing the deed every time he's resurrected. With this mess finally over, both Oz and Jack had a huge sigh of relief. Before disappearing into oblivion again, Jack decided to install some of his memories into Oz's mind, where he wasn't even willing to fight Glenn. When he snapped back into reality with Elliot and the others, they pressed their way to exit this maze. As they did, Oz kept on recollecting his memories and matching them with Jack's, leading him to think more thoroughly about his flaws. Unable to bear up with these thoughts, Oz collapsed as he began to address Elliot as Sir. The latter was taken aback by that, and was further infuriated when Leo blamed it on Elliot's inconsiderate and insensitive nature. Seeing how Oz was still considering himself as useless, Elliot stepped up and told Oz that being self-aware of his flaws is a major step forward, and that everything is up to him from this point on, which did breathe new life into Oz. That evening, Oz asked Elliot about the tune he heard both him and Leo playing, to which Elliot answered that he composed the tune and named it as Lacey. This didn't make any sense to Oz, since that's also what Glenn said to Charlotte a century ago. When asked about his name, Oz seemed to be a bit reluctant at first, due to the bad blood between the Vessalius and the Nitrays, especially with his younger sister stuck in this ordeal. But just as got enough courage to introduce himself, Gilbert came out of the woods to check on him, just like your missing father after hearing you won the lottery. Instead of laughing at this comical encounter, Elliot pulled his sword out and attacked Gilbert after realizing who he is, as he kept on shaming him for showing up in the defense of a coward like that blonde boy. Before he could harm Oz, Gilbert stood in the way and introduced him as Oz Vessalius, which made Elliot leave the scene with Leo in disgust. Since they came back from school, both Oz and Gilbert were literally unapproachable and gloomy. Brake thought that it might be because of their encounter with the Baskervilles, but Sharon brought up that it's mostly because they met with Elliot Nitray. As for Alice, she's busy doing Alice things. As he mentioned how useless Alice is for being this gluttonous, Sharon did knock some sense into him before turning to talk to a horrified Alice, where she began to vent about how Oz isn't paying attention to her as he should. Although Brake found this to be trivial, Sharon found Alice's jealousy to be wonderful, before proceeding to define jealousy as a bittersweet feeling. Just as Brake was about to excuse himself, Sharon caught him and demanded he take part in helping Alice. For her part, Alice didn't want any help from no one, but relented to Sharon's intimidation to address her as Sister Sharon. Brake tried to bluntly speak his mind out, only to be put in his place once again by Sharon. In the library, Sharon tried to get Alice to learn about romance from one of her books. Initially, Alice struck a resemblance to the character of one of those stories, but after seeing more and more of what's going on, Sharon abruptly decided to close it without explaining why. To her surprise, Alice knew about meeting in a tender exchange, since she did that with Oz already, much to Sharon's surprise. The first thing that Sharon did after hearing this was beating the living hell out of Oz, leaving Gilbert in shock for both seeing Oz getting beaten and hearing about what he had done. Oscar also found no better time to enter the room than now, only to be met with allegations of perversion from Brake, which turned out to have more than that. But I digress. Oscar failed to figure out who Ada was dating, but he decided to throw in a small celebration for the safe return of everyone else from uni. It was only at night that Oz realized that what Oscar had brought was not juice. Oscar, however, dismissed it with everyone being already old enough to drink. That also includes Oz, who should be 25 by now, while Gilbert being 24, Brake and Sharon being 20, and Alice being a chain, thus making Oz's fears invalid. What could possibly go wrong? As it turned out, everything went wrong, especially with Alice at the beginning, which I'm not going to talk about. However, Oz, although terrified of Alice, he couldn't help but begin acting like around Sharon, while being stunned at how Gilbert has been acting. Seeing this, Oz concluded that everyone was drunk, much to the amusement of both Brake and Oscar, especially when they saw the servants trying to get a grip of the situation, which took the help of Oz and another servant to put the drunkards in front of each other. One thing led to the other, and Oz found himself now stuck in a fight over who has the right to be with Oz. Good news is, the boy was saved by Sharon, but it'll be at the expense of his dignity, which is something that Oz have long lost for the sake of Sharon apparently. After a long night of fun and drinking, Oz and Brake got the moment to stay in the balcony and talk, where Brake spoke of the reasons why he's able to hold from getting drunk. When Oz mentioned that he doesn't want to see Brake in such a meek mood again, Gilbert came in to cry to Oz about how much he felt hurt for Oz's self-neglect. Despite that, Brake couldn't help but try to convince the drunk Gilbert to call himself in funnier names, thus leading Gilbert to address Oz as Master Oz, a name that Oz hadn't heard in years. In return, Oz also promised Gilbert to never let him burden the weight of protecting him on his own, as he wants to start learning how to be more useful. Brake, although confused, he was impressed that Oz is finally acting more his age now, just like Gilbert. While carrying Alice, Oz kept on thinking of what Leo had told him about Elliot, who considered his master to be an intelligent idiot, as he knew that Oz never did anything to harm him, but instead couldn't help but keep on having too much pride to admit to that. Once that explained, Leo expressed his pleasure in meeting Oz before following in his master's footsteps. While Oz was filled with optimism about the incoming missions, Oz was having that same nightmare where he was involved in the tragedy of Sablier, which became unbearable to him. One night, the trio, accompanied by Brake, went to the opera house, where Alice began to complain about how uncomfortable she was feeling in her red dress, instead of being like your lovely British aristocratic lady, and she could have complained even more if it wasn't for Oz complimenting her look. A moment later, they found Rhyme waiting for them to get them introduced to his Lord Rufus Barma. In fact, it was a surprise for Oz and the others, just like Rhyme before them, that Lord Barma agreed to a meeting with them, since he's known more to be an oddball, even though he's the leader of one of the 4 dukedoms. The reason behind this meeting was for Oz to get to know more from the old man about the Baskerville, and the tragedy of Sablier, the people that have connection to it, and of course to learn more about Jack's past. Oz proceeded to give a TLDR about what he learned so far from Jack, about the ultimate objectives of both the Baskerville and Pandora, which is taking over the will of the Abyss. Oz overthought about all that to the point he hit his head on a pillar, which made Brake remind him that on top of fixating his priorities, he's still committed to learning more about Alice's memories, to which Oz realized that she stopped talking about them after coming back from the Cheshire dimension. Before he could find an answer to any of his questions, he arrived with everyone else to the meeting room, where Lord Barma appeared in the wackiest possible way, which shocked everyone except Oz. Noticing this, Barma wasn't pleased in the slightest at how Oz reacted, but also knew that Oz was fine with accepting everything the way they are. In fact, Barma knew everyone's dirty little secret in this hall, which is exactly why Oz decided to meet Barma in person. However, Barma refused to give his powers just like that, as he requested informations that he does not know yet. Aware that Oz got nothing to offer, Barma asked him about why he's seeking the truth to begin with. Seeing that he was left with no other option, Oz revealed that he just wanted to figure what he can do to help those close to him. This answer shocked everyone, especially Barma, since he expected a completely different reaction from Oz. To top it off, he didn't want to admit, to the point that he began to bounce all over the place. However, Barma was not done yet, as he began now to switch his attention to Alice, whom he began to provoke her by making himself himself seem like he knows everything about her. Instead of getting traumatized, Alice kicked the old man in the jaw and revealed that despite how terrible the truth might be, she's still determined to figure out the reason why she was born. As she saw the old fart falling down, Alice began to degrade him while bolstering her own image. Seeing this, Oz was relieved as he pointed out that he sees Alice as a great comrade of his, which Alice actually appreciated. Gilbert and Brake saw these developments from behind, where the former of which was taken aback by how Oz had changed behind his back. When Oz and Alice got downstairs, they found old Barmer rolling on the floor as if he was in a rave. Before long, he was approached by Brake, who made it clear that he knows that Brahma knows about his past. Brahma smiled when he heard this and began to apply the same act on Brake as he previously did. Brake, however, knew better as he attacked the fat old man in front of him, thus revealing that Barma and all the mannequins in the hall are nothing but an illusion, which led the actual Lord Barma to complain about how obnoxious Brake's ability is. Despite this revelation, Brake began to bleed almost instantly, which was a result of reckless usage of his powers, much to Brake's annoyance. Despite that, Barma admitted that Brake was right about everything he said, so he decided to reveal the first proof that Brake is actually Kevin Lengard, and he would have ultimately succeeded if it wasn't for Rhyme's intervention. Although Rhyme succeeded in that once, he wasn't able to stop Barma a second time in revealing that Brake is an actual illegal contractor, and that the hand of Incuse had ran its course. Seeing this, Barma began to reveal Brake's past, 50 years ago, where he used to be a notorious illegal contractor, who was known more as Red-Eyed Phantom. Despite killing many people, Brake, whose name is Kevin, has fallen into the abyss, and in order to escape it, he did the deed, which is why Barma is still after him, or rather after more informations about what happened in there before returning from the abyss. In fact, Brake had fallen into the deepest point of the abyss, where he had met with Cheshire for the first time, where despite his best efforts to defend himself, only to find himself in the presence of the Will of the Abyss herself, who introduced herself as Alice too. Before he could do anything, Brake's chain came out on its own and snitched on everything it knew on him to the Will of the Abyss. To Brake's surprise, the Will knew what happened to the family he protected with his heart, which made Brake lose his temper and try to get rid of the Will himself. However, he found himself getting attacked by his chain instead. The Will was not pleased with that, so she obliterated the chain to smithereens. Brake was stunned in front of this horrific nightmare that he found himself in, especially when the Will told him that she can turn him into a chain if she ever felt like it. As she kept on talking about how that works, the Will mentioned that it's all according to Glenn, whom she hated just as much as she did with Gilbert and Vincent. Before transforming Kevin into her doll, she took his left eye off of him and handed it to Cheshire. When everything seemed hopeless, Kevin tried to free himself from the Will, but it'd take the occurrence of the tragedy of Sablier. Amidst the Will's struggle, however, Vincent came in with Gilbert on his shoulder. 100 years ago, a happy Alice was enjoying herself when Vincent came in, threatening her that she would meet the same fate as her cat if she kept on dreaming, thus sending Alice into a state of trauma. Back to present time, Brake seemed to wake up from his coma, where he remembered that he was visiting Barma, who couldn't help but address him as Lord Idiot, instead of thanking Barma for saving him the trouble of explaining himself, that is. Seeing that Oz was concerned, Brake asked the boy to act like himself and be selfish. Seeing how persistent Barma is to know about the weight of his sins that sent him to the very depths of the abyss, Brake began to remember what happened after his first encounter with Vincent there, which triggered Alice so much that she had Cheshire to kick him while he was down. Meanwhile, Alice began to cry hysterically when remembering how mean have Vincent been to her, before having her mood change as soon as she noticed that it's now tea time. Although she was excited for it, she was more interested in having Jack join her. Things were looking good for the time being, until Vincent came in to ruin the mood once again, by telling Alice that Jack is no longer alive, and that he saw him lying in a pool of his own blood after being slain by Glenn. Alice refused to believe the young psycho at first, but Vincent insisted that he's not lying, and that everything that happened to Jack, Gilbert, and himself. Alice wasn't able to accept this, so much that she began to scream as her room was collapsing. Seeing this, Brake addressed Alice to change her past with her powers. After hearing this entire story, Barma began to connect the relationship between both the Alice with them and the Will of the Abyss. I know this might be slightly confusing, but please bear up with me. According to Barma, the name Alice was mentioned in the memorandum of Jack Vessalius. Alice used to be a prisoner at an isolated tower in the Baskerville mansion. The reasons why Glenn locked her there is unknown, but Alice was glad that Jack is visiting her every single day. Glad to know about that, Jack suggested that she should also visit him given the opportunity. Eventually, Jack began to notice certain things about her, for the severe contradiction in her cat's behavior to the same changes he noticed in her clothing style from time to time. But most importantly was the change in her air too. When he was going to take her, Jack noticed that Alice was having an ominous aura around her, which didn't take him long to figure out that this Alice, although having the same name as the actual Alice, is connected to the very depths of the abyss. Even more shockingly was that both Alices came from the same womb, and that they both are bound by the chain of the abyss. Oz wasn't expecting to hear this, but wasn't also to expect that Jack would also express his regrets in his memorandum either. Barma, on the other hand, was more concerned about the fate of the entire city of Sablier, since it's connected to Alice. After all, Glenn needed Alice to obtain the will of the Abyss. As such, Barma decided to interrogate both Alice and Break at Pandora, who still haven't revealed everything he knows as of yet. However, Oz decided to stand in the way of Barma, as he believed that Barma is far more annoying than Break. Aside from how cynical that sounded at first, Oz pointed out that he has no faith in Barma, as he thought that he can twist words to serve his best interest. As such, Oz decided that he'd be the one to overturn every word of Barma by using Jack's name. As he admitted that he's playing it dirty, Barma was about to do humanity a favor by teaching some manners into this child as part of his holy crusade against children, when he found the Gen Alpha kid to be surrounded by his bodyguards. Left with no other options, Barma changed his mind. Once he was out, Oz and his goons began to think of what they should be doing next. Their answer came from Alice, who believed that they won't be able to think properly on an empty stomach. Seeing that Gilbert and Break were going to get some food, Oz couldn't help but talk to Break about bringing up his past, which made Alice conclude that they finally became comrades, since they're all meddling in each other's business. Oz agreed to that, with Gilbert following suit, much to Break's annoyance. On their way outside the opera house, Break reintroduced himself as Kevin Legnard, which we'll still keep on calling him as Break for the sake of this video. Break used to serve the Sinclair family for as far as he can remember. Oz knew the name of that family since he knew that they were wiped out by a rival family. Oz, however, didn't agree entirely about how the family disappeared, as he stated that during that time there were huge factional conflicts, and that he came back one day from a mission to find his master and most of the people he cared for were wiped out. Since then, Break kept on regretting not spending time with his master, as well as not keeping a closer eye on other aristocrats' movements. While having these thoughts, a chain came to him and persuaded him to agree to become a host for one. The rest of the story was already given away by Barma. Oz was disappointed that for all that killing, Break was not able to change his past. However, Break confessed that he managed to change his past after making a promise to fulfill a wish of hers in exchange for freeing him. Before he knew it, Break found himself at the front gate of the Rainsworth family 30 years ago. By then, he learned that his previous master was not attacked by burglars just as he wished. But for all intents and purposes, the Sinclair family was already gone, including the youngest daughter of his former master. As he began to grieve about that, Oz made it clear that there's no way to know what could have been done after changing the past. Break agreed to that, as he admitted that in fact, he never liked the daughter of his master at all, and that her fate was the result of his selfishness. He thought that he was doing his best for his lord's sake initially, until he realized the scale of the problem he made when he grew up. Despite agreeing to how foolish that must have been, Oz also mentioned Break must do his best to move forward in life, and that he must learn to rely on those around him as well. Joke's on you, Oz, you don't know how to take care of yourself, even though you're still self-aware of that. Despite the cynical remark, Break was genuinely appreciative of Oz's help. One night, Oz and his goons were engaged in a fight with an illegal immigrant, which didn't take a long time from Alice to finish off her enemy. At sunrise, and on their way back to the castle, Oz kept on thinking about a conversation he had previously with Break about the quickest way to come out with informations from Vincent, where Break advised him against it. Instead, Break advised Oz to keep on searching for Alice's memory fragments, since that's more guaranteed to get him the answer he's seeking. For that reason, Break invited Oz and Alice to join a Pandora task force for that reason, which brings us to present time, where Oz is now beginning to have second thoughts, since they were getting no results. Alice was also on the same page, as she thought that Break had tricked them. Gilbert, however, after carefully assessing the situation, concluded that the chains that hold Alice's memories are rare, further disappointing Oz. Once they arrived back home, Oz was met with his sister Ada excited to meet him, only for the latter to be met with a wall of Pandora agents who felt threatened by her. And they could have resorted to being even more American if it wasn't for Rhyme's explanation to the men. Once this awkward display of overprotectiveness was over, Oz was finally able to say hi to his sister. When he learned that Ada had some stuff to discuss with him, Alice became instantly hostile. Gilbert tried to persuade Alice to let go of Oz for now, only to find Oscar jumping out of a bush and attacking him. Have things been going any better for Oz? No, the boy found the entirety of Pandora accompanying him anywhere he went. Eventually, Alice got so infuriated by this overprotectiveness that she began to threaten to get rid of some people. Fortunately, Break came in to hand over some new orders from HQ. Despite Rhyme's obvious concern, Break assured him that he will ensure Oz's safety with the others. Although Rhyme had no other option but to follow orders, he decided to hand Oz a gun, even though he was aware that the higher-ups in Pandora would punish him. When asked about why he requested security to be lifted off of Oz, Break pointed out that he did so because he cannot relax with so many people in the mansion. Sharon also added that there was no need for that much security at the moment, because the Baskervilles were not prioritizing Oz at the moment, since finding Glenn Baskerville is their top priority for the time being. Unfortunately for Oz, he's still committed to finding those memory fragments of Alice, and coming back empty-handed again wasn't helpful. Seeing this, Gilbert decided to excuse himself for a moment. In fact, Gilbert headed to the Nitrae's mansion to have a word with Vincent, since being seen will get him in deep trouble. Just as he thought that he was doing alright, however, he was dismayed when he saw Oz and Alice standing at the front gate of the Nitrae's house. In fact, Oz was still determined to try his luck with asking Vincent directly, despite all of Brake's warnings against it. Once inside, Oz and Alice were met with Echo, who informed the former that Vincent is away for the time being. In contrast, Gilbert managed to sneak his way through the party without getting detected, until he got his way to where Vincent is. Seeing his older brother, Vincent was happy for his return. Gilbert, however, decided to strike the iron while it's hot, so without further ado, he asked Vincent about what happened a century ago in Sablier, only for Vincent to repeat that he knows nothing. Seeing no point in insisting, Gilbert excused himself out of the mansion. Behind his back, however, Vincent knew beforehand that Oz would show up, although he didn't expect that Gilbert would also show up. Although he's in no trouble for the time being, Vincent was determined to not let anyone know about what happened 100 years ago. The next morning, Brake and Sharon learned about Gilbert's visit to the Nitrae's, which made Oz also confess to visiting them, albeit he came back empty-handed. Just as Oz began to question if there's any way to know about what happened, Brake suggested asking Jack. It would have been a good idea if only Jack showed up again after coming back from Lutwidge Academy, which leaves two more people to ask, Glenn Baskerville and the Will of the Abyss. For her part, Alice was against asking the Will of the Abyss. Alice was able to communicate with the Will back when she was in the Abyss, that is. However, Alice suggested that this method could be feasible if Oz could go back to the Abyss once again. Technically, it's possible using Raven and X. Sharon, however, pointed out the difficulties that Oz will face there if you were planning on committing to undertake something that an entire organization like Pandora have failed in getting so far. Oz thought of trying to get back to see the tragedy of Sablier, but that wasn't doable either. Seeing no other options, the team decided to keep on searching for memory fragments by hunting chains. Amidst his disappointment, Ada came in to remind her brother of his promise to go shopping with her. Amazingly, Oz had an idea when he opened his pocket watch. As such, he apologized to Ada and informed everyone else of his plans. The next morning, Oz and the others went to where everything started, at the same site where the event from 10 years ago took place, since he was hoping that this will get him some clues, as the place must have had a certain connection to Jack. As they went deeper inside the mansion, Alice was the first to arrive at the underground grave, where Oz found the pocket watch that Jack had created. Seeing that Gilbert was trying to figure whose grave it is, Alice caught up on his suspicions. Nevertheless, that didn't shake her determination to find her memories. Still, Alice could not sense a thing from her memories there, so she left the place without saying much. In the cathedral, Oz repeated his oaths before the clock, only to find Gilbert putting his robe on him, as he didn't get the opportunity to do so during the ceremony. When he turned back, he couldn't help but smile after seeing the reflection of the much younger Gilbert. Once this quasi-ceremony was over, Oz reassured Gilbert that he shouldn't have any regrets about the past mistakes he made. He also asked Gilbert about who he saw there to protect. Before Gilbert could answer that, Sharon rushed in after defeating a chain, as she informed them that they're getting attacked by a horde of chains. Even Alice got overwhelmed, until Gilbert came to unseal her powers. Although they won, it came as strange to Brake that chains with no contractors had snuck their way into the real world. Amidst that, Alice noticed the presence of something strange at a fair distance, only to be shocked just like everyone else with the entire capital being caught on fire. Gilbert and the others rushed their way for the capital on a carriage in hope of saving what could be saved. The city was in utter chaos, as chains were wreaking havoc all over the place, terrorizing the people, and playing Sonic the Hedgehog. Perhaps the most baffling part of all was the incredibly slow reaction from Pandora. It was so late that HQ became swarmed by chains. Even those that tried to put up a fight were quickly overrun by the chains in the city. Fortunately for the civilians, Oz and his goons arrived just in time to save them from evil Sonic, but they still have a long way to go to save the day. When they began to figure out who's the instigator behind the release of the chains, Alice stated that it must be the doing of the Will of the Abyss, albeit she's not sure about how that was done. Before they could get on the move, one of the chains came in and attacked them. Left with no other options, Oz and the others retaliated back. Heck, Oz and Alice were successful in rescuing a baby from imminent danger, but this was incredibly tiresome for Oz. Sharon found herself also in a similar situation, where she found Gilbert in her support. Seeing this, Brake realized that he was left with no options but to use his full power. Oz noticed that Brake had summoned Mad Hatter, so he ran away as far as possible with Alice to not get her caught in danger. Brake was ultimately successful in eliminating all the hostile chains in the city, but it was at the cost of his own well-being. Elsewhere, Oz thought of further investigating the city to make sure that the ordeal was over. Alice, however, alarmed him that the incident is still far from over. Seeing that a snowstorm is about to take over town, Oz and Alice took shelter in an abandoned house. For her part, Alice hated the scenery outside, as it reminded her of the Abyss, where she was all alone in the darkness. Her fate there would change when she met Oz. Hearing this, Oz stated that the balance in the Abyss might have been lost might be because the Will of the Abyss felt lonely, just like Alice. As he finished those words, the window opened. Oz closed it and thought that it might be because of the wind. but Alice knew better since a chain was coming their way. Fortunately for Alice, Oz came to her rescue and got her out of the house. As they kept on running, the duo found themselves stuck between the Baskervilles in front and the chain behind them. To their surprise, the Baskervilles helped Oz and Alice, although it wasn't exactly clear why they were doing so. Nevertheless, Oz acquiesced and left the Baskervilles to deal with the chains. Things on Gilbert's side were not promising, since he ran out of ammo in the middle of the fight. Just as things were about to get disastrous, reinforcements from Pandora came in just in time to save Gilbert and the others. Not too long after, Gilbert and Oz managed to reunite, where they got attacked by a much bigger monster. This time, not even Pandora's reinforcements could do a thing against him. Drake considered using Mad Hatter again, but seeing that he's no shape in doing that, Alice decided to deal with the monster instead. Oz tried to argue against it, but Oz insisted that this is her fight. Alice began her fight with the monster rather poorly, since Alice kept on seeing Jack bidding her farewell with each hit she landed on the monster until she got caught. Oz has also been thinking about what Drake told him about his ability to control. Seeing that Alice is about to be defeated, Oz managed to use his powers once again to control the behemoth from the abyss and eventually destroying it. As he did, Oz and Alice found themselves in a memory fragment where Alice used to enjoy her time on a boat with Jack. In that meeting, Jack confessed that this will be the last time they'll ever play together, which Alice begged him to reconsider. However, what Oz noticed was that the Will of the Abyss was watching everything from the other bank of the river in disbelief. Before Oz could get to ask her anything, she left in silence and disappeared in the fog. Once that dream was over, the petrified monster fell into pieces. The next day, Oz and Alice were discussing what happened yesterday. Oz mentioned that he was scared from dying at that fight, because that will make him never be able to see Alice ever again. Drake heard that, and was impressed to mention the contrast between Oz now and his former self, before apologizing for calling Oz as a creepy kid before. When Alice began to question that, Oz promised that he would be the one to embrace her with his heart and soul if she ever felt alone, much to her dismay. Once Oz finished his child's play with Alice, he sat to have some tea with Oscar, where he was surprised to learn that they're going back to the Vessalius mansion. Although Sharon and Drake were pleased to keep on hosting Oz and the others, Oscar thought that it'd be best to go back home now. Oz was saddened by the news, but Alice scolded her slave for being indecisive about heaving back to his original home. Oz's reluctance was justifiable, however, since he will have to meet his father, who had previously refused to accept Oz as his own flesh and blood. Ironically, Oz was surprised to hear this from none other than Alice, whose Gilbert rushed in to shut her up. Despite his surprise to learn that Gilbert spilled the beans to Alice, Oz didn't think much of it, as he believed that his father might see him differently after these 10 years. Only then Oscar revealed that Oz's father had gone missing since the day of the ceremony. As to where, let's keep on thinking that he's still searching for the legendary Kingdom of Milk. Although he was relieved of his father's absence, Oz was furious that Gilbert hadn't told him about it sooner, only for Oscar to answer that nobody knew how to address the issue to Oz at the time. Elsewhere, Drake couldn't help but express his relief at learning that Oz possesses immense power to control all of the Abyss. Although the informations about the tragedy of Sablier are somewhat muddled, it is still good to know that the Will of the Abyss holds special feelings for Jack Vessalius. Since people have been saying that Jack Vessalius has been reborn, it's easy to assume that the Will of the Abyss would likely listen to anything that Oz would say. With that being revealed, Drake concluded that the Baskervilles must have wanted to change something in the Abyss by dropping Oz there, who although doesn't look like it, but he's incredibly sharp. That evening, Oz and the others had finally reached the Vessalius mansion, where Mrs. Kate was overjoyed to see Oz back after all these years. As a welcome for Alice, Oz and Oscar asked for meat to be served for dinner, much to the gluttonous girl's joy. For his part, Oz was impressed that nothing has changed in this mansion after years of absence here. Even the corridor where he learned of how his father despised him remained the same. While having dinner, Oscar found that he had to mention to Oz the importance of assuming the duties of a duke. He also couldn't help but mention the importance of each duke to have the family gatekeeper as their chain, which is called Griffon in the case of the Vessalius dukedom. When Oz turned to see what it looked like, he realized in horror that it was the exact same chain that had thrown him into the abyss, thus revealing the truth that Gilbert had been hiding for 10 years. As it turned out, Oz's father had been working with the Baskervilles for more than 10 years. Just as Alice began to think of how cruel this must have been, Drake barged into the room through a closet, only to learn that Oz had shut himself in his room for the previously mentioned reason. Despite that, Alice still insisted on meeting her slave to knock some sense into him, even though Gilbert opposed this. Once she barged into the room, Alice found that Oz had figured what his sin was, to his father at least, since he possessed the power to control the abyss as well as being related to the tragedy of Sablier. Seeing his frustration for realizing what he truly is, Alice got furious, as she believed that Oz had been lying to her, before deciding to learn about her own self without him as she left. However, this must have knocked some sense into Oz, as he went the next morning to Drake and Gilbert and asked them to get him to meet his father in Baskerville. It didn't take them long to figure out where Baskerville is located, so they decided to make their way there with Oz immediately. To their surprise, Alice also decided to join in, since Oz is still Alice's slave. On their way, Oz admitted that not all of his decisions were right until this very moment, since he was nothing but a spoiled child who knew nothing. Oz finally came to the realization that he's a flawed human. That night, Break assumed that Oz's new revelation about what's going on between him and his father must have shattered his self-esteem, which got him into a needless squabble with Alice, who was determined to crush any obstacle that comes his way. After all, she can't afford to see Oz acting like a crybaby. Once they reached their destination the next morning, Oz and the others found themselves in an unavoidable fight with Charlotte and her Twitch stream goons. Since they were eager to judge Oz, the Baskerville summoned Griffon, who was at the verge of sending both Gilbert and Break to the abyss and getting rid of both Oz and Alice in one go. However, Oz managed to use his powers to free everyone from Griffon and fight back, where he managed to single-handedly get Alice to defeat Griffon, to the surprise of everyone. In the aftermath of this fight, Oz saw his father standing on the top of a ruined tower, so he approached him to tell him that no matter what, he will always keep on acknowledging his existence no matter what, before leaving. Although Oz might have very limited time to solve all the unsolved mysteries, he decided to rewrite his own story. That concludes the anime recap. As always, if you enjoyed, let me know down below and I'm out.